Clara Bennett set down her pen at exactly 10 o'clock, folded the letter she would never send, and walked out of Whitmore Estate without saying goodbye to a single soul. She did not cry. She did not look back. She had spent 8 years making sure. Nathaniel Whitmore's world ran perfectly, and in all that time, he had never once asked her name with the intention of truly knowing the woman behind it. If you're new here, subscribe and follow this story to the very end. Drop your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The summer of 1816 settled over the Virginia countryside, the way grief settles over a house after a funeral. Quietly, completely, and without any warning that it means to stay. Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the top of the staircase inside Whitmore Estate and looked down at the great hall below, where every candle had been lit for the occasion, where the finest families of the county had gathered in their finest clothes, where the music was bright and the laughter was easy, and the air smelled of honeysuckle and tobacco, and something expensive that he could not name. He looked across the room and felt nothing, or rather, he felt something so faint and so unfamiliar that he did not yet know what to call it. He did not look for Clara Bennett in the crowd. He never did. That was the thing about Clara. She was always there, which meant he had never once had to look for her. He turned away from the staircase and moved through the hall, accepting congratulations with the particular ease of a man who has received them his entire life. Neighbors shook his hand. Their wives smiled. Younger men watched him with the quiet envy of those who are still building what others have already been handed. And in the center of all of it stood Eleanor Hartwell. She was 24 years old and beautiful in the way that portraits are beautiful. Composed, precise, deliberate. Her father was one of the wealthiest merchants in Richmond. Her family's name opened doors that even the Whitmore name required an introduction to approach. She wore cream silk that evening, and she carried herself with the absolute certainty of a woman who has never once been made to feel that she is standing in the wrong room. She was, by every measure that Nathaniel Whitmore had been taught to apply, a perfect match. He crossed the floor toward her, and she smiled, and he smiled back. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he had learned to ignore the way a man ignores a dripping sound in a wall, something shifted uneasily and was immediately still. "You look pleased with yourself this evening," Eleanor said. "I have cause to be," he said. "This is a good night." "It is," she agreed. "Though I notice you have not danced yet." "I've been seeing to the guests." "Your guests seem to be seeing to themselves admirably." She tilted her head slightly. There is a difference between a host who is present and one who is merely nearby. It was, he would think later, a perfectly reasonable thing to say. Eleanor was perceptive. She noticed things. That was one of the qualities he had always appreciated in her. But standing there in the candlelight with the music swelling behind him and the whole of his county watching, he could not quite locate the warmth that the observation deserved. I took her hand and led her to the floor, and they danced, and he was present, and he was nearby, and the music was lovely, and none of it felt the way it was supposed to feel. Across the estate, in the small sitting room just off the library, the one that nobody used except when the family wanted quiet, Clara Bennett was reading. She had been at Whitmore Estate for 8 years. She had arrived the summer her father died, when she was 20 years old and possessed of nothing except a modest education, a thorough knowledge of household management, and the particular kind of resilience that comes not from strength, but from the long practice of having no alternative. Her father had been a minister, a good man, a man who believed that kindness was a form of daily labor, that tending to others was itself a form of prayer. He had left her no money and no connections, but he had left her something that would prove, in the years ahead, to be worth considerably more. He had taught her how to pay attention. Clara paid attention the way other women paid calls. Constantly, methodically, with careful regard for detail, and absolutely no expectation of being thanked for it. She noticed that Mrs. Whitmore's headaches were worse on days when the household accounts were in disarray, so she took over the accounts. She noticed that Nathaniel's correspondence with his land agent had begun to develop a particular pattern of vagueness that suggested the agent was not being entirely forthcoming, so she began keeping a separate ledger. She noticed that the cook's youngest daughter was being made to work hours that no child ought to work, and she quietly rearranged the kitchen schedule. She noticed that Nathaniel Whitmore took his coffee too hot, and his opinions not nearly hot enough, and that he was lonely in a way he would never have been capable of identifying, because loneliness of that particular kind requires a degree of self-knowledge that his upbringing had not seen fit to provide. She noticed all of it, and she said very little about any of it. That was the nature of the arrangement, as far as anyone at Whitmore Estate was concerned. Clara was useful. Clara was reliable. Clara was the kind of woman who could be trusted with the silver, the correspondence, and the more difficult conversations with the neighbors who had complaints. She was not the kind of woman who appeared in the great hall when the candles were lit. She was the kind of woman who made sure the candles were properly trimmed before the guests arrived. Tonight she sat in the small sitting room with a book open in her lap, though she had not turned a page in some time. Through the wall, she could hear the music. She could hear the laughter. She could hear, faintly, the sound of feet on the polished floor of the great hall. She had declined to attend the gathering. Mrs. Whitmore had asked, with the genuine if somewhat distracted kindness that characterized all of the older woman's interactions with her, whether Clara would not join the party. Clara had smiled and said she had a letter to finish, which was true, and that she preferred the quiet this evening, which was also true. What she had not said was the other thing. The thing that sat in her chest like a stone she had been carrying for so long, she had almost stopped noticing the weight. She set her book down and looked at the window. Outside, the Virginia summer was loud with insects and thick with heat. The moon was full. Somewhere on the grounds, a horse moved in the paddock. Clara had known, for approximately 4 months, that Nathaniel intended to offer Eleanor Hartwell a formal proposal. She had known it the way she knew most things at Whitmore Estate, not because she had been told, but because she paid attention, and the details were not difficult to read if you were in the habit of reading them. She had watched him make his inquiries about the Hartwell family's finances. She had watched him consult, once, in lowered tones, with the family attorney. She had watched him look at Eleanor across a dinner table, with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is satisfied with it. Not the expression of a man in love, though perhaps Nathaniel would not have recognized the difference. Clara recognized the difference. She recognized it because she knew what it looked like when Nathaniel Whitmore actually felt something. She had seen it the morning his mother's fever broke, and he had sat at the foot of the staircase with his head in his hands for a full 5 minutes before he collected himself. She had seen it the afternoon he received word that his old friend Thomas Hadley had died, and he had stood very still at the library window for a long time, and had been quieter than usual for 3 days after. She had seen it in 100 small moments that no one else at Whitmore Estate had been positioned to observe, because she was always there, and everyone had stopped noticing she was there, which meant they behaved as though she wasn't. What she had never seen, not once in 8 years, was that expression turned toward Eleanor Hartwell. That was not, she told herself firmly, any of her concern. She stood up, set her book on the side table, and went to the small writing desk beneath the window. She sat down, took a piece of paper, and picked up her pen. She held it for a long moment. Then she began to write. Not the letter she had mentioned to Mrs. Whitmore. Something else. Something she had been composing in her mind for several weeks, revising in the quiet hours of early morning when the house was still and there was no one to tend to and no task to complete. And she was, for a little while, simply a woman alone with her own thoughts. She wrote it carefully because Clara Bennett had always done everything carefully. She folded it when she was done and wrote a name on the outside. Then she set it on the desk, put on her shawl, and walked out of the sitting room, down the corridor, through the side door of Whitmore Estate, and out into the Virginia summer night. Inside the great hall, Nathaniel was mid-conversation with Harold Beaumont, whose tobacco holdings bordered the eastern edge of the Whitmore property, when the first small wrongness registered. He did not know, initially, what the wrongness was. Only that something was different about the evening in a way that had nothing to do with the candles or the music or the quality of the wine. Believe the acreage along the creek could be worth considerably more than your current assessment, Beaumont was saying, in the way that Harold Beaumont said everything, which was loudly, and with the implication that whatever Nathaniel currently thought was in need of correction. "You may be right," Nathaniel said, though he wasn't listening. "Course I'm right. You ought to come out and have a look before—" "Excuse me a moment," Nathaniel said. He crossed the hall. He wasn't certain where he was going. He found himself at the door of the sitting room off the library. The small one, the quiet one. And he opened it. The room was empty. The candle on the side table had burned down an inch. There was a book sitting open on the seat of the chair by the window. He looked at it without picking it up. Something in his chest tightened very slightly. I went back to the hall. The party continued around him with all its usual noise and brightness. He found Eleanor near the fireplace, speaking with her mother, and he stood beside her for a moment without quite joining the conversation. "Are you well?" Eleanor asked, with the efficient attentiveness that characterized her engagement with most situations. "Perfectly," he said. "Have you seen—" He stopped. Eleanor looked at him. "Seen who?" He opened his mouth, closed it. The name sat on his tongue in a way that felt, suddenly, very strange. "No one," he said. "Never mind." He spent the rest of the evening in the hall. He laughed when laughter was appropriate. He spoke when speaking was required. He stood at Eleanor's side when the informal announcement was made and accepted the congratulations of his neighbors and was, by every outward measure, a thoroughly happy man. But the small wrongness did not leave, and when the last carriage had rolled down the drive and the candles had been extinguished and the house had gone quiet, he walked through the corridor toward the library and opened the door of the sitting room once more. The candle had guttered out. The book was still on the chair, and on the desk beneath the window, folded once and addressed in careful handwriting, was a letter. It was addressed to him. He picked it up. He stood with it in his hand for a moment. He broke the seal. He read it. He read it again. He set it down on the desk and stood very still. The letter was not long. Clara Bennett was not a woman given to excess. She had never used 3 words when 2 would do, and the letter reflected this with a precision that, under other circumstances, he might have admired. "Mr. Whitmore, I hope this evening brought you everything you expected of it. I believe, in the years ahead, it will bring you much that you did not expect as well, and I hope that those surprises are of the better kind. I am leaving Whitmore Estate. I have taken nothing that does not belong to me. The household accounts, through the end of the quarter, are in the lower right drawer of the library desk. The correspondence with your land agent is organized by date in the blue folder. There are several matters there that warrant your personal attention, and I have made notes in the margins. Your mother's physician has been informed that I will no longer be managing her appointments. He is a capable man, and she is stronger than she sometimes believes herself to be. She will be all right. I have been grateful for the 8 years I have spent here. I leave without resentment and without any expectation of reply. Clara Bennett." He read it a 3rd time, then a 4th. He set it face down on the desk. He went to find Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret Whitmore was in her sitting room with her needlework when her son appeared in the doorway. She looked up at his face and set the needlework down immediately, the way a woman does when she recognizes that the conversation about to happen is not a small one. "Where is Clara?" he asked. Mrs. Whitmore was quiet for a moment. "She came to say goodbye to me this afternoon," she said carefully. "I thought you knew." "She said nothing to me." "Nathaniel." His mother's voice was very gentle. "She said a great many things to you over the years. The difficulty was not that she was silent." He looked at her. "She just left." "She left," his mother agreed. "Yes. Without—" He stopped. He started again. "She gave no notice. No, Nathaniel." His mother folded her hands in her lap. She was 61 years old and had been through a great deal, and her patience had been tempered by all of it into something very close to wisdom. "Come and sit down." "I don't want to sit down." "I know you don't. Come and sit down anyway." He sat. He was not, at 34, accustomed to sitting at his mother's direction, but there was something in her voice that made it feel like the correct thing to do. She looked at him for a long moment before she spoke. "That young woman," she said finally, "has managed this household for 8 years. She has done it with more grace and intelligence and genuine care than anyone I have ever employed, and I have employed a great many people over the course of my life." "I know that," he said. "Do you?" He did not answer. "She remembered," his mother continued, "that your father liked his letters sorted by sender rather than by date. She knew that the cook's wife had a difficult winter 3 years ago and quietly found a way to supplement her household without making it a matter of anyone's dignity. She kept your land agent honest for 2 years before you had any idea that honesty was in question." A pause. "She was, in every meaningful sense of the word, indispensable." "Mother, and in 8 years," she said, "you called her by her first name exactly 7 times. I counted, because I was watching, and you were not." The silence in the room was very loud. "She was not a servant," his mother said quietly. "She was never a servant. But you treated her the way we treat the things we cannot imagine being without, as though they will simply always be there, because we have never been made to imagine otherwise." He stood up. He walked to the window. The paddock was quiet in the moonlight. The fields stretched out beyond it, familiar and still. "Where did she go?" he asked. "To her mother's cousin in Charlottesville, I believe, though she did not say how long she intended to stay." He turned. "I'll send." "Nathaniel." His mother's voice stopped him. "If you send a letter asking her to come back and manage your accounts, I will not forgive you for it. And she will not come. And you will deserve neither the refusal nor the forgiveness." He looked at her. "Think," she said simply. "Think about what you are actually asking." He stood there for a long time. The following morning, Nathaniel Whitmore sat in the library at the desk where Clara had done the majority of her work for the better part of a decade. The household accounts were in the lower right drawer, exactly as promised. The correspondence with the land agent was in the blue folder, organized by date. The marginal notes were written in her small, careful hand. Observations, questions, concerns, each one precise and useful and utterly without ego. He sat and read through it all for 2 hours. He was a capable man. He had always been capable. But as he worked through the documents she had left him, he began to understand, with a clarity that was not comfortable, exactly how much of his capability had rested on the foundation that Clara Bennett had spent 8 years quietly building beneath him. She had caught an error in the land agent's accounting that had saved him nearly $400. She had negotiated, without ever telling him she was negotiating, a better arrangement with the tobacco merchant. She had managed the complexities of his mother's health with a combination of medical knowledge, personal warmth, and diplomatic skill that he was absolutely certain no one he might hire to replace her would possess. He picked up her letter again. He read the last line. "I leave without resentment and without any expectation of reply." He set it down. He picked up his own pen. He sat for a very long time without writing anything. Then he put the pen down, stood up, and walked out of the library. He walked down the corridor, past the sitting room, to the small room at the end of the hall. He opened the door. He stood in the doorway. It was a modest room. She had personalized it very little in 8 years. A few books, a small box on the windowsill, a shawl draped over the chair. Most of what she owned, apparently, had fit in the single bag she had taken when she left. He walked to the chair by the window. He stood beside it. He did not sit in it. Something in him balked at that, at occupying the space that had been hers. But he stood beside it and looked out the window at the summer morning. And he tried to do what his mother had told him to do. He tried to think. Not about what he needed, not about the accounts, or the correspondence, or the dozen practical matters that had suddenly become his problem to solve in ways they had not been for 8 years. About Clara. About the specific, irreplaceable, entirely human fact of her. I thought about the afternoon 3 winters ago, when his mother's fever had reached its crisis point, and the physician had been delayed, and Nathaniel had stood in the hallway outside his mother's room, not knowing what to do, and Clara had come out of the room with her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its pins, and looked at him with complete calm and said, "She's going to be all right. Go downstairs and make sure there's hot water and that the physician's man knows to come directly to the back door when they arrive." And he had gone, because her certainty had been solid enough to stand on. And when the physician had arrived and the fever had broken and his mother had been out of danger, he had gone to find Clara, and she had been in the kitchen, quietly washing her hands, and he had said thank you, and she had said of course, and that had been the end of it. I thought about it now. Thank you. Of course. And he had walked away. He had been relieved and grateful, and he had walked away. And the next morning, he had asked her if she had ordered the additional firewood for the season, and she had said yes, and handed him the receipt. And they had both moved on to the next thing, because there was always a next thing, and the next thing had always gotten done, because Clara had always done it. He turned away from the window. He walked out of the room. In the corridor, he nearly walked into James, the young man who helped with the horses and occasionally carried messages. "James," he said, "I need you to saddle my horse." James blinked. "Sir, I know what time it is." He paused. "Saddle it, please." "Yes, sir." He went back to the library and wrote two things. A brief note to Eleanor Hartwell, which he sealed, and a longer letter, which he did not seal, and which he folded and put in the inner pocket of his coat. Then he went to his horse. Then he stopped. He stood in the early summer morning with his horse saddled before him, and the road to Charlottesville stretching out ahead, and he stood very still, and he remembered what his mother had said. Think about what you are actually asking. What was he asking? I was asking her to come back. He knew that much. But his mother's words, and the long quiet of the morning, and the particular way the letter in his breast pocket had felt as he wrote it, too urgent, too unearned, made him see for the first time the shape of what he was actually doing. He was asking her to come back because he needed her, and she had spent 8 years being needed. He put his hand on the saddle and did not mount. The road to Charlottesville was 40 miles. He stood there for a very long time. Then he went back inside, took the letter from his coat pocket, and sat down at the library desk. He read what he had written. He read it the way Clara would have read it, if she had been the one reviewing the document, carefully, looking for what was not said as much as for what was. And what was not said was the most important part of all. He took a fresh piece of paper. He began to write again, this time more slowly. This time without the urgency, without the need, without the voice of a man calling back an employee who had given inconvenient notice. He wrote the way a man writes when he is, for the first time in his life, trying to say something true. He wrote for a long time. When he was finished, he read it through once. Then he folded it and sealed it and wrote her name on the outside. Her name, not Miss Bennet. The formal address he had used in correspondence for 8 years, polite and distant and entirely appropriate for a woman who kept his accounts. Just Clara. He sat and looked at it for a moment. Then he handed it to James with instructions for delivery and went back to the library and picked up the blue folder and the household accounts and began the slow, humbling work of trying to understand everything she had managed while he had been occupied with the comfortable business of not noticing. He worked through the morning. He worked through the afternoon. And when evening came, and the great hall was quiet, and the candles were unlit, and the house had the particular stillness of a place from which something essential has been removed, Nathaniel Whitmore walked to the sitting room off the library, opened the door, and stood in the doorway. The chair by the window was empty. He looked at it. He thought about 8 years of evenings he had not spent in this room, in this doorway, noticing that someone was here. I thought about what it would mean to have spent them differently. I was not a man who wept easily. But standing in the doorway of that small, quiet room with the Virginia summer heavy around him, and the empty chair catching the last of the light, he felt something move in his chest that had no name. He was prepared to give it, only the certain, unmistakable knowledge that he was looking at the space where something irreplaceable had been, and he had not known its value until the moment it was gone. He pulled the door closed. He went to bed. But he did not sleep for a very long time. The letter arrived in Charlottesville on a Wednesday. Clara knew it was from Nathaniel before she opened it. She recognized the seal, the paper, the particular weight of it in her hand. She had handled enough of his correspondence over 8 years to know the difference between a letter from Whitmore Estate and any other letter in the world. She set it on the table beside her breakfast and looked at it for a long time without touching it. Her mother's cousin, Ruth Alcott, was a widow of 60 with sharp eyes and a generous spirit, and the particular quality of not asking questions that her guests had not invited. She set a cup of tea near Clara's elbow and went back to her own business without comment, which was one of the many reasons Clara had come here and not anywhere else. Clara picked up the letter. She broke the seal. She read it. It was not what she had expected. She had expected a practical letter. A letter about the accounts, the correspondence, the land agent's irregularities. She had prepared herself, on the 40-mile road from Whitmore Estate, for exactly that kind of letter, and she had decided, with the quiet finality that had carried her through most of the difficult decisions of her life, that she would not respond to it. This was not that letter. She read it again. It was careful. It was honest in a way that Nathaniel Whitmore's communications almost never were, because honesty of the personal kind had never been required of him. The world had not made that particular demand. But this letter made an attempt at it, and the attempt was visible in every sentence, the way effort is visible in the handwriting of a man who does not usually have to try. He had written about the blue folder, about the marginal notes, about the $400 discrepancy in the land agent's accounts that he had found only because she had flagged it with a small, careful question mark 18 months ago, and he had not known to ask what it meant until now. Then he had written something else. He had written, "I am not asking you to come back. I am aware that I have not earned the right to ask that. I am writing because it has been 3 days since you left, and I have not been able to sit in the library without looking at your chair. And I think the least honest thing I could do at this point is pretend that what I am feeling is merely the inconvenience of a household in disarray." Clara read that sentence 4 times. Then she folded the letter and put it in the pocket of her dress and went to help Ruth with the garden, because she needed to do something with her hands. Ruth said nothing. She handed Clara a pair of shears and pointed at the climbing roses along the back fence. And for an hour, the two of them worked in the summer heat without speaking, and Clara was deeply, sincerely grateful. "You going to write back?" Ruth asked eventually. "I don't know," Clara said. Ruth considered this with the measured neutrality of a woman who has strong opinions she has learned not to share uninvited. "Well, you've got time to decide." "Have I?" Clara said it more quietly than she intended. Ruth looked at her. "You've got all the time in the world, girl. That's what walking away means. It means the clock's yours now." Clara looked at the roses in her hands. She had thought, on the road to Charlottesville, that leaving would feel like losing. She had braced herself for that feeling, the way you brace for a cold plunge. The sharp shock of it, the breathlessness, the slow adjustment. Instead, it had felt like setting down a very heavy thing she had been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten she was carrying it. That feeling frightened her almost as much as the weight had. She did not write back that day, or the next. On Friday, a second letter arrived. This one was shorter. It said, "I spoke with my mother this morning. She told me she had counted 7 times. I did not understand what she meant at first. When I did, I sat in the library for a long time and did not do any useful work. I am not writing to ask anything of you. I am writing because I think that for 8 years I spoke at you a great deal without ever speaking to you, and I would like to correct that, if you are willing. You do not have to be willing. I understand that I have given you no particular reason to be. Nathaniel Whitmore." Clara read it standing in the front hallway of Ruth's house, with the door still open behind her, and when she was finished, she was standing there for a moment with her eyes closed and the letter held against her chest before she was aware of what she was doing. She lowered it. She went inside. She sat down. Ruth appeared in the doorway of the front room with flour on her hands and took one look at Clara's face. "Second letter?" she asked. "Second letter." "Worse than the first?" Clara looked at her. "What do you mean worse?" "I mean harder to ignore." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. "Sit with it. Don't decide anything today." "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking about it." Clara looked down at the letter. "He said he's not asking me to come back." "Do you believe him?" A long silence. "I don't know," Clara said. I believe he believes it. Ruth nodded slowly. That's a harder situation, she said, than if he were simply lying. She did not write back, but she thought about it. She thought about it in the early mornings when the house was quiet and Ruth was still asleep, and Clara sat at the small desk in the corner of the guest room with the letters in front of her, and the summer birds making their noise outside, and no task to complete, and no one to tend to. She thought about all of it. 8 years of it. The accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments that she had thought, at the time, were simply the texture of ordinary life. She thought about the morning she had found him in the library at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at the correspondence from his father's attorney, with the expression of a man trying to hold a crumbling wall together with his hands. She had made him a cup of coffee, the way he took it, which she had never had to be told, and sat down across from him without asking whether he wanted company, because she had known he did, and they had sat together in the lamplight while he worked through the papers, and she worked through her mending, and he had not once acknowledged her presence in words, but had also not once given any indication that he wished she would leave. In the morning he had said, "I believe I've sorted it," and she had said, "I believe you have," and he had gone upstairs, and she had washed the coffee cups. That was the shape of it. That was always the shape of it. And the question she had been refusing to look at directly for approximately 4 years, and which she could no longer avoid in the quiet of Ruth Alcott's guest room, was whether she had accepted that shape because it was all she had expected, or because she had hoped, privately, that it might one day change. She sat with that question for 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, she picked up her pen. She wrote, "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate your letters. I am not yet certain what I wish to do with them. I will tell you when I am. C. Bennett. Short. Careful. Her." She sent it before she could reconsider. Back at Whitmore Estate, the reply arrived on a Tuesday, and Nathaniel held it for a full minute before he opened it. It was 9 words, not counting her initial. He read it standing at the library desk, and something in his chest that had been clenched since the morning he'd found her room empty loosened, very slightly, for the first time. She had written back. She had not said yes. She had not said no. She had said, "I will tell you when I am," which was, he was beginning to understand, the most Clara Bennett thing she could possibly have said. She did not commit until she was certain. She did not perform certainty she did not have. She did not offer more than what was real. He had spent 8 years watching her operate on exactly those principles and had called it efficiency. He understood now that it was something considerably more than that. He sat down and wrote back immediately. Then he stopped, because writing back immediately was the action of a man who was not thinking carefully, and he was trying to think carefully. He waited a day. Then he wrote, "That is fair. I will be here." He found the land agent on a Thursday. His name was Gerald Pruitt, and he had managed the eastern parcels of Whitmore property for 6 years. He was a compact, jovial man with an easy handshake and the particular confidence of someone who has been trusted for long enough that he has stopped worrying about whether the trust is monitored. Nathaniel arrived at Pruitt's office without advance notice. Pruitt looked up from his desk and smiled, and then something in his face shifted, some minor recalibration, as he registered the expression Nathaniel was wearing. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. "What a surprise. I wasn't expecting—" "No," Nathaniel said. "You weren't." He sat down. He put Clara's folder on the desk. "I'd like to go through the accounts." Pruitt glanced at the folder. "Of course, I can have my clerk prepare." "Now," Nathaniel said. "I'd like to go through them now. Another recalibration." "Certainly." He reached for a ledger. "Is there a particular concern?" "There is." Nathaniel opened the folder. He found the page with the first question mark. "Can you explain this discrepancy? September of 1814. Pruitt looked at it. Something moved across his face. "That would have been the cost overrun on the creek drainage. I believe I mentioned that in my quarterly." "You did not mention it in your quarterly," Nathaniel said. "I've read the quarterly. You listed the drainage work as completed within the original estimate." He pointed to the note in the margin. It was in Clara's handwriting. "CF. Invoice from Henderson and Sons. Total does not match. Someone on my staff noticed that the invoice from the contractor does not match the amount recorded here. Pruitt was quiet. That difference, Nathaniel continued, is $43, which I would not ordinarily consider significant on its own. But there are, if I count correctly, 11 similar discrepancies between June of 1813 and last spring. They are all modest. They are all explained in your reports by cost overruns or market fluctuations. He looked up. The total is $387. Pruitt said nothing. I would like, Nathaniel said, with the particular quiet that his mother had always recognized as the most dangerous register of his voice, an explanation. What followed was not pleasant. It involved Pruitt's increasingly fragile attempts at justification, and Nathaniel's increasingly precise dismantling of each one, and ended with an agreement that was not an agreement so much as a documented acknowledgement of what had occurred and a structured repayment arrangement. Nathaniel drove back to Whitmore Estate in the late afternoon. He sat in the library. He looked at the folder. He thought about the fact that the question marks in the margins had been there for 18 months. That Clara had spotted the pattern, documented it, organized the evidence, and then placed it in a folder where he would find it when he finally looked. She had not told him. She had not sent him a memo. She had not once, in all the time she had worked at Whitmore Estate, said, "I noticed something you missed." She had simply made sure the information was there, documented and clear, for the day when someone was paying attention. He picked up his pen. He wrote her a letter about Pruitt. Not because she needed to know, it was no longer her responsibility, but because she was the only person in the world who would fully understand what it meant, and because writing to her with the honest account of it felt, obscurely, like the right thing to do. He hesitated before he sealed it. Then he added, at the bottom, "I should have been paying attention, I know that. I am not sure this letter makes up for the years I wasn't. I'm not certain anything does. But I wanted you to know that the question marks were not wasted." Clara received that letter on a Friday and read it at the kitchen table with Ruth across from her eating breakfast, and she set it down and said nothing for a moment. "What is it?" Ruth asked. "He found Pruitt," Clara said. Ruth raised an eyebrow. "The land agent?" "I left notes. I didn't know if he'd follow them." She looked at the letter. "He followed them." "And?" Clara was quiet. "And he wrote to tell me, not to thank me, not to ask what to do next, just to—" She stopped. She picked up the letter. She read the last paragraph again. "He said the question marks weren't wasted." Ruth said nothing. "I've been doing this work for 8 years, Clara said slowly, "and no one has ever—" She stopped again. Her voice was doing something she didn't want it to do. She took a breath. "He noticed," she said finally. "That's all. He just noticed." Ruth put down her cup. "Clara, I know. That man is doing something." "I know," Clara said again. "The question is whether you're going to let him." Clara folded the letter very carefully. She put it with the others. There were 5 now, a small collection in the drawer of the guest room desk. She had not reread them. She had read each one once, set it away, and refused to revisit it. She took them all out now. She sat and read them in order. The first one, the careful, effortful honesty. The second one, 7 times, and I didn't know what she meant. The brief acknowledging reply after her own short note. The one about waiting. And now this one. She laid them out on the table and looked at them. They told a story. A slow story, the way real things are slow, without the convenient compression of feeling that people sometimes perform when they believe they are being watched. These letters were not performed. She was almost certain of that, and she was good at recognizing performance. She had managed enough social occasions and diplomatic dinners to know exactly what it looked like when a man said what he thought he was supposed to say. This was not that. This was a man who did not know how to do this, trying to do it anyway. She picked up her pen. She wrote more than 9 words this time. She wrote, "The notes in the margin were not meant to be discovered all at once. I had hoped they would be useful gradually, over time, in the ordinary course of attention. I am glad they served their purpose. I am also glad that Pruitt has been addressed. He has been a problem for longer than 18 months, though the documentation I have only covers that period." She paused. Then she wrote, "You asked once, or rather, you did not ask, but I think you meant to, why I stayed as long as I did. I am not entirely certain I can answer that. But I can tell you that it was not solely because I had nowhere else to go. I had other options. I stayed because Whitmore Estate was the first place in my life where what I was good at actually mattered, even if it was not always acknowledged." She stopped. She almost crossed that out. Then she left it. She signed it. Clara. Not C. Bennett. Just Clara. She sealed it and gave it to Ruth's boy to take to the post. And then she went and sat in the garden for a long time and thought about what she had just done. When Nathaniel read it, he read the last paragraph 4 times. The first place in my life where what I was good at actually mattered. He set it down. He put his hands flat on the desk. He thought about the girl who had arrived at Whitmore Estate 8 years ago, 20 years old, her father 3 weeks in the ground, carrying what amounted to very little except her own capabilities. He thought about what he had said to her on the day of her arrival. He tried to remember it. He could not. He did not remember a single word he had said to her on the day she arrived at his estate, had come to his door with nowhere else to go, and he had, apparently, made some arrangements, spoken some appropriate words, and moved on with his day. He remembered, very clearly, the day the tobacco merchant had tried to renegotiate the annual contract, and Clara had somehow, in the course of a 15-minute conversation, gotten him to agree to better terms. He remembered thinking, distantly, that she was clever. He had not thought to tell her so. He went to find his mother. Margaret Whitmore was in the morning room, which had been her particular domain for 40 years, surrounded by the familiar accumulation of an entire life, family portraits, the writing desk that had been her mother's, a small shelf of books that she had read so many times they had been rebound twice. She looked up when he came in. She watched his face. She did not speak. "I've been writing to her," he said. "I know." "Did she tell you?" "She wrote to me," his mother said simply. "She has written to me regularly for 8 years. Did you know that? She has written to me every week since she left, to make sure I am managing with the new arrangements. She found me a physician's assistant who comes on Tuesdays, before I had thought to look for one myself." He stared at her. "She is still taking care of this family," his mother said quietly, "from 40 miles away, because that is who she is. That is not what she was paid to be, Nathaniel. That is who she is." He sat down. "When you were 17, his mother said, you brought home a stray dog from the lower field. Do you remember? A shepherd mix, half-starved. You spent 2 weeks feeding it, getting it well. And then when it was well, you found it a home with the Hendersons because you said you didn't want a dog that needed so much attention." He looked at her. "Mother, I am not comparing Clara to a dog," she said, with the dry precision that was, he had always thought, the most alarming form of his mother's humor. "I am observing that you have a pattern of treating things well when they require your engagement, and then, when they no longer require crisis management, allowing them to simply exist in the background of your awareness, without really seeing them." The room was very quiet. "She kept this household alive," his mother said. "Not because we were a crisis she needed to solve, but because she cared. And that kind of care, Nathaniel, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply shows up, day after day, without expectation, that is not something you find because you go looking for it. It finds you. And when it does, you either see it or you don't." He looked at his hands. "I didn't," he said. "No," his mother agreed. "You didn't. I'm trying to. I know you are." She reached over and put her hand on his. It was a small gesture. She was not a woman who made large ones. "That's why I'm still talking to you." The letters continued. Clara wrote about Charlottesville, the rhythms of Ruth's household, which were so different from Whitmore Estates that she had needed nearly 2 weeks to stop feeling that she'd forgotten something every time she sat down. She wrote once about her father, about the particular quality of his patience, the way he had listened to people with his whole attention, in a way that made them feel, always, that they were the most important person in the room. Nathaniel wrote back, "I think you learned that from him. The way you listen. I realize I noticed it without ever thinking about what it meant that you did it." She read that in Ruth's garden on a hot August afternoon and sat very still. She wrote back, "Most people notice what they need from other people without thinking about what the noticing costs. You were not unusual in that. You were simply the one I happened to be around." He wrote, "That is either very gracious or very sad, and I am not certain which." She almost smiled. She wrote, "Perhaps both." And something changed in the letters after that. Not dramatically, not in the way of stories where a single moment tips everything over, more in the way of seasons changing, gradually, then all at once, and only visible in retrospect. They had been, in the letters, two people who were addressing a problem. The problem of 8 years of misapprehension. The problem of two people who had occupied the same house for nearly a decade and barely known each other in any honest sense. They became, in the letters, something else. Not entirely. Not without caution. Clara was constitutionally incapable of proceeding without caution, and Nathaniel was learning, slowly, with evident effort, that her caution was not a door closing, but a door that required more care than he was accustomed to giving. But something shifted. He wrote to her about the estate, about the work he was doing now that he was doing it himself, the things he was learning, the things he was embarrassed he had not already known. He wrote about his mother, who was doing better than she had in years. He wrote about a conversation he'd had with the youngest of the field hands, a boy of 13 who had apparently been slipping books from the library for 6 months, under the impression that no one had noticed. "Someone had noticed," he wrote. "There are pencil marks in the margins of 2 of them. Not my mother's handwriting. Not mine." Clara's hand went still on her pen. Was he reading things he shouldn't have? She wrote back carefully. "He was reading Locke," Nathaniel wrote, "and making quite intelligent observations about it. I have arranged for him to continue." She had to set the letter down. She had noticed that boy. His name was Samuel. He was quick and curious, and possessed of the kind of mind that flourishes or withers, depending entirely on whether anyone bothers to feed it. She had been slipping books his direction for 2 years. She had never told anyone. She had assumed, when she left, that it would simply stop, the way all the small, careful arrangements she'd made would eventually stop without anyone noticing they had existed. Nathaniel had noticed, not in the general sense, in the specific sense. He had found the pencil marks. He had recognized them. He had seen it. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment. Then she wrote back, "His name is Samuel. He's been reading for 2 years. He understands more than you might expect." "I know his name," Nathaniel wrote. "He told me, when I asked him what he thought of Locke's argument about property. He said, and I am quoting him directly, that it seemed to him that owning land was a lot more complicated than most people who owned land like to admit." Clara laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 6 weeks, and the sound of it surprised her enough that Ruth appeared in the doorway of the sitting room with a startled expression. "Good news?" Ruth asked. "I want," she said slowly, "to not go back to being invisible." "All right," Ruth said. "And if that were guaranteed? If you knew, truly knew, that it would be different?" Clara looked at the letters in front of her. The stack of them. His handwriting, which she had learned to recognize through years of copying it, transcribing it, organizing the documents that came from it, but which looked different now. Not the handwriting of a man dictating. The handwriting of a man who was choosing each word carefully because he understood, perhaps for the first time, that words were not cheap. "I don't know if it can be guaranteed," she said finally. "No," Ruth agreed. "It can't. Nothing can." She folded her hands. "But you've spent 8 years being careful, and being sensible, and being the person who managed everything without asking for anything. And it got you here." She paused. "I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying that maybe what you're afraid of isn't him failing to see you. Maybe what you're afraid of is wanting to be seen that much." Clara looked at her. "Because if you want it," Ruth said quietly, "then it can hurt you. And you've spent a very long time making sure that nothing could." The summer heat pressed against the windows. Somewhere outside, a bird called once and went quiet. Clara looked at the letters. She thought about a chair by a window, about 8 years of mornings, about pencil marks in the margins of a book that a curious boy had read in secret, and a man who had noticed them and asked the boy his name. She picked up her pen. She did not write a careful letter. She wrote an honest one. It was the most frightening thing she had done in a very long time. The honest letter took Clara 3 drafts and most of a Thursday evening to write. The first draft was too careful. She read it back and hurt herself. The measured, diplomatic Clara, who had spent 8 years managing every word for its effect on other people. And she set it aside. The second draft went too far in the other direction. She had written things that were true, but raw in a way that felt, on reflection, like handing someone a wound instead of a hand. She set that one aside too. The third draft was simply what it was. She wrote about the morning she had arrived at Whitmore Estate. The exact quality of the fear she had carried across that threshold. Not fear of him, not of the house, but the very specific fear of a woman who has run out of alternatives and must now depend on the charity of people who do not yet know her value, because she has not yet had the chance to demonstrate it. She wrote about how that fear had shaped every decision she made in the first year, the quiet efficiency, the unasked questions, the careful calibration of how much to offer without overstepping. She wrote, "I told myself it was simply professional prudence. I told myself I was being sensible. I was. But I was also afraid that if I asked for too much, if I occupied too much space, wanted too openly, needed too visibly, the arrangement would collapse, and I had nowhere else to go. So I made myself small. And then I made myself so small for so long that I forgot that smallness was a choice I had made rather than a fact of what I was." She paused. Then she wrote, "I don't think I am small. I never have been, not really. But it is remarkable what a person will accept as their own dimensions when the world around them confirms it long enough." She signed it. She sealed it before she could change her mind. She handed it to Ruth's boy without looking at it again. Then she sat in the garden for a long time in the late evening, listening to the summer insects and the distant sound of someone's horse on the road, and she felt the particular nakedness of having told the truth about yourself to someone who has the power to confirm your worst suspicions about it. She waited. The reply came in 4 days, which was faster than any letter from Whitmore Estate had arrived yet, which meant he had written it immediately and not waited. She noticed that. She noticed everything. She opened it. He had written, "I have read your letter 6 times. I keep reading it because I keep thinking I must have misunderstood something, that there must be a version of the last 8 years that makes me less culpable than the version you have described. And then I read it again, and I understand that there isn't. You made yourself small because the arrangement required it, and because you were afraid, and because no one at Whitmore Estate, least of all me, ever gave you any reason to believe that taking up more space would be welcome. That is not professional prudence on your part. That is a failure on mine. I don't know what to do with that knowledge exactly, but I am not going to pretend I don't have it." Clara set the letter down. She pressed her fingertips to the table and breathed. Ruth appeared in the doorway, read her face, and said nothing, which was the correct response. "He understands," Clara said finally. "Good," said Ruth. "I don't know what to do with that." "I know you don't." Ruth came and sat across from her. "But that's a better problem than the one you had before." It was Eleanor Hartwell who forced the matter. Clara had not thought about Eleanor Hartwell in several weeks. She had thought about her in the immediate aftermath of leaving, had thought about her with the careful, deliberate fairness of a woman who understands that the other person in a complicated situation is usually not the villain. Eleanor was not the villain. Eleanor had done nothing wrong. Eleanor had simply been the recipient of a decision that had been made without any honest accounting of what it would cost. But Eleanor Hartwell had also not simply accepted the situation. Clara learned this on a Wednesday in late August, when a letter arrived that was not from Nathaniel. It was from Mrs. Whitmore. Margaret Whitmore's handwriting was distinctive, large and slightly unsteady, the product of the tremor she had developed in the last year, which she addressed by writing more slowly and with more care, so that each letter was deliberate in a way that made the whole communication feel considered. The letter was 3 pages. Clara read it at breakfast, with her tea going cold beside her. Mrs. Whitmore wrote, "I have been uncertain whether to tell you this, because I am not entirely sure it is my place. But I have decided that given the particular nature of your situation, and given that you have continued to care for this family with a generosity that I have never adequately acknowledged, you deserve to have the full picture." Eleanor Hartwell came to this house last Tuesday. Clara's hand tightened on the paper. She came, ostensibly, to call on me. We spoke for some time. She is a perceptive woman, and she said several things that were, in their way, quite honest. She told me that she was aware of the letters between you and Nathaniel. She did not say how she was aware of this. She told me that she believed the formal engagement arrangement ought to proceed as planned, as it had been agreed between the two families, and that she felt the recent correspondence was the result of a momentary disruption that time and the proper attention to existing commitments would resolve. Clara read that sentence twice. She also said, Mrs. Whitmore continued, that she had always understood your presence at Whitmore Estate and had never considered you a concern. I will tell you honestly, Clara, that the particular way she said this, with absolute certainty, without any acknowledgement that you might be a person whose feelings were relevant to the consideration, told me a great deal. I am not writing to alarm you. Nathaniel has made his own feelings clear to me, and I believe them. But I thought you should know that there are forces in this situation that are working against what I hope is being built between you, and that Eleanor Hartwell is not the passive figure in this arrangement that she may have appeared to be. As always, with genuine affection, Margaret Whitmore. Clara folded the letter. She set it on top of his letters, in the drawer. She sat very still. Then she got up, put on her walking shawl, and went out. She walked for a long time. The road out of Charlottesville wound past farms and through stands of timber and along a creek that ran low in the August heat, and she walked without thinking about where she was going, which was unusual for her. She had always been a person who knew where she was going. She walked and thought about Eleanor Hartwell. She thought about her with as much fairness as she could manage. Eleanor had done what capable, ambitious women in 1816 Virginia did when their interests were threatened. She had moved to protect them. Quietly, through the proper channels, without any display that could be called unseemly. She had come to the house. She had spoken to the mother. She had delivered a message that was perfectly calibrated for the circumstances. I have always understood your presence at Whitmore Estate, and never considered you a concern. That sentence. That particular sentence. Clara had spent 8 years being not a concern. She had been the woman in the background, the woman who made things run, the woman who could be relied upon not to take up inconvenient amounts of space. And Eleanor Hartwell had looked at that woman and had seen, had correctly identified, that she was the kind of person who could be safely dismissed. Had been, until recently, the kind of person who could be safely dismissed. Clara stopped walking. She stood on the road with the August heat pressing down on her and the creek running quietly somewhere below her, and the particular clarity that comes from having been genuinely angry, finally settling into something more useful. She was not invisible. She had chosen to be invisible because it felt safer than being seen and found wanting. She had made herself manageable and efficient, and entirely, carefully unchallenging, and she had done it for so long and so thoroughly that the people around her had simply accepted those dimensions as her actual dimensions. Eleanor Hartwell had looked at Clara Bennett and seen a household manager. Nathaniel Whitmore had spent 8 years doing the same thing. The difference was that Nathaniel was trying, and the question, the real question, the one she had been walking around the edges of for weeks, was whether trying was enough. Whether the effort of seeing her now could compensate for 8 years of not seeing her. Whether a man could genuinely change the way he perceived someone, or whether he would, eventually, in the ordinary routines of daily life, slide back into the comfortable habit of treating her as background. She turned around and walked back. When she reached Ruth's house, she sat down at the desk and picked up her pen. She did not write to Nathaniel. She wrote to Eleanor Hartwell. The letter to Eleanor was not long. Clara was not interested in volume. She wrote with the same precision she brought to everything: the household accounts, the marginal notes, the letters that had gradually become something neither of them had planned. She wrote, "Miss Hartwell, I understand you visited Whitmore Estate last Tuesday. I appreciate Mrs. Whitmore's honesty in informing me. I am writing to you directly because I believe you are the sort of woman who prefers directness, and because I believe we have been operating under a shared misunderstanding that it would be better to address plainly. You have indicated that you do not consider me a concern. I understand why you reached that conclusion. For 8 years, I took considerable care not to be one. I would like you to know that this was a choice I made, and not an accurate representation of my nature or my capabilities or my feelings on the matter at hand. I am not writing to make any claim or any demand. I am writing because you deserve to conduct your affairs with accurate information, as I believe you would wish to do. The situation at Whitmore Estate is not a momentary disruption. I cannot tell you what the resolution will be, because I do not yet know. What I can tell you is that I am not the sort of woman who will quietly manage the outcome in your favor. With respect, Clara Bennett. Bennett, she sealed it. She gave it to Ruth's boy. She sat back in her chair. Her hands were steady. That was the thing about having finally stopped being careful. It turned out that what was on the other side of careful was not chaos. It was simply clarity. Eleanor Hartwell received the letter on a Friday and read it twice in her own sitting room in Richmond. Then she sent a note to her father. Thomas Hartwell was a man who had built a significant fortune through the application of 2 principles. Identify what other people want before they have fully admitted wanting it, and move faster than they expect you to. He had raised Eleanor on these principles, and she had absorbed them with the particular thoroughness of a daughter who understands that capability, in a woman of her era, is the only currency that reliably holds its value. She told him about the situation at Whitmore Estate, all of it, with the accuracy and the absence of self-deception that was her best quality. She told him about the letters. She told him about Clara Bennett's letter. She told him what she believed the situation to be. He listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he said, "And what do you want?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I want," she said carefully, "to not be the fool in this arrangement. I want to not be the woman who proceeded with a formal engagement while the man was conducting an epistolary courtship with someone else, and I want to not have pretended I didn't know." Her father nodded. "And the Whitmore connection itself?" "Is valuable," she said, "but not at that price." He nodded again. "Then you know what to do." She did. It was the second Tuesday of September when Nathaniel received a visit from Thomas Hartwell. He received it in the library, where he had been sitting with the latest letter from Clara, the one she had written after receiving his mother's account of Eleanor's visit, the one that had said, with characteristic precision, "I have written to Miss Hartwell. I thought you should know. I am not managing this situation. I am simply declining to be managed by it." He had read that line 4 times before Hartwell's arrival was announced. He put the letter in the desk drawer. Thomas Hartwell was 62, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who communicated authority through stillness rather than volume. He sat across from Nathaniel without waiting to be invited and placed his hat on the corner of the desk with the ease of a man who has never been in a room where he was not welcome. "I'll be direct," Hartwell said. "I believe you already know why I'm here." "I have a reasonable guess," Nathaniel said. "Eleanor has withdrawn from the arrangement." A beat. "I see," Nathaniel said. "She asked me to convey that she does so without resentment and without any expectation of complication. The formal agreement between our families was understood by both parties to be contingent on mutual willingness, and she no longer considers that condition met." Hartwell paused. "She also asked me to tell you that she respects the honesty of the situation more than she would have respected the alternative." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "She deserves better than what I was offering," he said. "She does," Hartwell agreed, without softening it. "She will find it." He stood. He picked up his hat. "I'll tell you something, Mr. Whitmore, not as Eleanor's father, as a man who has been in business for 40 years. He looked at him steadily. "The people who can see clearly are worth more than everything else combined. I've worked alongside a great many capable people in my life. The ones who see, who genuinely observe and understand and remember what they observe. They are exceptional. They don't come along often. He put on his hat. Don't waste another 8 years. He left. Nathaniel sat in the library for a long time. Then he picked up his pen. He wrote a letter to Clara. He wrote, "Eleanor has withdrawn. Her father came this morning. I want you to know this, not because it changes anything I have already said or felt or tried to make clear in the last several weeks, but because I understand that you have been navigating this situation with incomplete information, and that was not fair to you. I also want to tell you something that I have been trying to find the right words for since approximately the third letter I sent you, which means I have been failing to say it for quite some time. I don't want you to come back to Whitmore Estate." He stopped. "Read that back." Added, "I want to explain what I mean by that before you reach a conclusion. I don't want you to come back the way you left. As the person who manages everything and occupies the background and makes sure the candles are properly trimmed. I don't want to offer you your old room and your old chair and the blue folder and the reasonable expectation that things will go on much as they did before, except that now I am paying better attention. That is not enough. I know that. I have known it since I read your letter about smallness. What I want is something I'm not certain how to ask for, because I have never before in my life had to ask for something that I could not guarantee. And I find that I have very little experience with wanting something that is entirely in someone else's hands to give. I would like to meet you, not at Whitmore Estate. Somewhere else. Somewhere that is neither yours nor mine, where you are not the household manager, and I am not the man you worked for, and we might try to talk to each other the way two people talk when they are simply two people. I reckon that is probably the most uncertain thing I have ever proposed. I understand if the answer is no." Nathaniel. He sealed it. He handed it to James. Then he sat and experienced, for the first time in his adult life, the complete and helpless uncertainty of waiting. Clara received the letter on a Thursday. She read it at the kitchen table. She read it again. She set it down. She picked it up. She read the part about not wanting her to come back the way she'd left, and something in her chest did something complicated and significant. She handed the letter to Ruth without a word. Ruth read it. She set it down. She looked at Clara across the table. "Well," she said. "Well," Clara agreed. "He wants to meet." "I can read, Ruth. Somewhere neutral." Ruth tapped the letter. "That's not the instinct of a man who wants his housekeeper back." "I know. That's the instinct of a man who is frightened." Clara looked at her. "Frightened of what?" "Of you saying no," Ruth said simply. "Which means he understands, finally, that you can." The silence in the kitchen was full of something Clara didn't have a word for yet. "Where?" Ruth asked. "He didn't say." "Are you going to write back?" Clara sat for a long time. "I'm going to think about it," she said. Ruth nodded. "How long?" Clara almost smiled. "You said I had all the time in the world." "I did," Ruth said. "I also said the clock was yours. That means you can use it however you like. It doesn't mean time has no weight." She stood and carried her cup to the wash basin. "Something like this, you can think yourself out of if you're not careful. You've been careful your whole life. At some point, careful becomes the cage." Clara looked at the letter. She thought about the chair by the window, the empty room, the 8 years. She thought about Samuel with the pencil marks in lock, about Pruitt and the question marks, about a man sitting in the library at 2 a.m. with the accounts and a cup of coffee, and no one to tell him it would be all right until she came in and sat across from him without being asked. She thought about Ruth's question, weeks ago. "What is it you actually want?" She had said she wanted not to be invisible, but that wasn't the whole truth. She'd known it at the time, and she'd said it anyway because it was the part she could say without it feeling like falling. The whole truth was this. She had loved Whitmore Estate. Not the building, not the position, the particular texture of daily life there, the way work felt when it mattered, the way a household can feel like a living thing when someone tends to it with genuine care. She had loved the library and the sound of the fields, and the way Mrs. Whitmore laughed at dry jokes. She had loved the quiet mornings before anyone else was awake, when the house was hers in the most honest sense, not owned, but deeply, intimately known. And she had loved, without ever once permitting herself to use the word, the man who sat at the desk in the library and trusted her with every important thing in his life, except the knowledge that she was important. She had loved him in the way that is the most honest and the most dangerous, not in spite of who he was, but with full awareness of it. With full awareness of his blindness and his ease and his privilege, and the gentle, unconscious arrogance of a man who has never had to wonder whether he is valued. She had loved him knowing exactly what he was. Because underneath the title and the estate, and the comfortable assumptions of an inherited life, there was a man who sat with his dying friend's letters for 3 days and couldn't sleep, who got up at 2 in the morning and tried to hold things together, who had given a 13-year-old boy access to a library and called it normal. She had loved what she'd seen when no one was watching, and she had put that love in a very small box and kept it in a very safe place for 8 years because it had seemed, without question, like the only reasonable thing to do. She picked up her pen. She wrote one sentence. She wrote, "I will come to Charlottesville. You could come here." She sent it. He came on a Saturday. He arrived in the mid-morning, which was practical. A morning arrival from Whitmore Estate meant leaving before dawn, which meant he had not spent the previous night comfortably. Clara noticed this when she saw him. He looked like a man who had done something effortful, which was not a look she was accustomed to seeing on him. He knocked at Ruth's front door himself. She heard him knock. She heard Ruth answer it. She heard Ruth say, with the measured warmth of a woman extending courtesy she has not yet decided to make permanent, "Mr. Whitmore, Clara's in the garden." She was not in the garden. She was in the front sitting room, standing beside the window, listening. She heard him say, "Thank you, ma'am." She heard him walk around the side of the house. She went out the front door and around the other side, so they met at the corner of the garden gate. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. They had not been in the same place at the same time for 7 weeks. He looked. She registered this before she could stop herself. Like himself. Exactly like himself. That was the thing about having known someone for 8 years. You knew every small register of their face, every habitual expression, the way they held themselves when they were uncertain versus when they were at ease. He was not at ease, but he was not performing composure either. He was just standing there, at the corner of Ruth Alcott's garden gate, with his hat in his hand, and 40 miles of Virginia road behind him and the full weight of the last 7 weeks in his face. "You came," she said. "You said I could," he said. A beat. "That is not quite the same thing as an invitation," she said. "I know." He met her eyes. "I came anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the garden gate. He came through. They sat in Ruth's garden on the bench beneath the elm tree, which was old enough that its roots had disrupted the brick path on one side, and the shade was thick and the heat was slightly less pressing than in the open, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. "I know," she said. "I've read the letters." Something moved in his face. Was that a joke? Possibly. She folded her hands in her lap. "I don't know how to do it either, for the record. I've been managing households and other people's problems for 8 years. I'm quite good at those. This..." She stopped. "This is different." "Yes," he said. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer is not what you think I want to hear." He turned to look at her. "All right. If I had been..." She stopped, started again. "If I had been the kind of woman you typically noticed, if I had come to Whitmore Estate 8 years ago with money, or family, or the sort of appearance that made men in drawing rooms look twice, would any of this be the same?" He was quiet for a long time. She waited. She did not fill the silence for him, because she had spent 8 years filling silences for him, and she was not going to do it for this one. "I don't know," he said finally. She looked at him. "I want to say yes," he said. I want to tell you that what I feel now is entirely about who you are and has nothing to do with the circumstances or the timing or the particular way that losing something makes you understand its value. But I think—" He stopped. "I think that would be the comfortable answer. And I am trying not to give you comfortable answers." "That is the honest answer," she said. "Is it enough?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But it's more than I expected, and I will tell you why." She turned to face him properly. "Because in 8 years, Nathaniel Whitmore, you never once said 'I don't know' to me. You gave orders, you made decisions, you accepted the outcome of situations. You did not sit in gardens and tell women that you were uncertain and that you wanted to be honest about it." She paused. "That is new, and I don't know what to do with it yet, but I'm not ready to dismiss it." I was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the relief she might have expected, and not the confidence. Something quieter than either. "What do you need?" he asked. The question landed in a way she hadn't anticipated. Simple, direct, without any architecture of what he hoped the answer would be. What did she need? "Time," she said. "Not distance, not correspondence, though the correspondence has been—" She stopped. "It has been more than I expected. But time, in proximity. To see whether the man in the letters and the man at Whitmore Estate are the same man." "That seems fair," he said. "It is also somewhat inconvenient," she said, "given that I am in Charlottesville and the estate is 40 miles away. I'm aware." He reached into his coat. He produced a letter, a proper letter, sealed, addressed in his handwriting. He held it for a moment without offering it. "Before I give you this, I want to be clear that this is not a condition, it's an offer, and the answer can be no, and I will understand that, and I will not hold it against you." She looked at the letter. "What is it?" "My mother has asked, through me but in her own words, whether you would consider coming back to Whitmore Estate, not as a household manager," he said, "but as a guest. For whatever period of time is reasonable. With your own terms, your own schedule, and the absolute clear understanding that you are there because you choose to be, and for no other reason." Clara looked at him. "She wrote it herself," he said. "I helped her address it because her hand was unsteady. The words are entirely hers." "She shouldn't have had to ask," Clara said. "I know, I asked first. She wanted to ask as well. She said you deserved to hear it from her in her own voice." He paused. "She also said that if you didn't come back, she was going to be very put out with me for the foreseeable future, which I consider a separate but equally compelling motivation." The corner of Clara's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the precursor to one. She reached out and took the letter. She turned it over. Her name on the outside in Mrs. Whitmore's large, careful, trembling hand. Miss Clara Bennett, at Mrs. Alcott's, Charlottesville. She pressed her lips together. She opened it. She read it. She folded it and held it in her lap. "She says," Clara said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "that the roses by the east door have not been properly cut since I left, and she doesn't have the heart to ask anyone else to do it because you always did it wrong, and she only told me that the right way was how I did it." "That's true," Nathaniel said. "I cut them badly. She told me so at length. She says she misses hearing me read to her in the evenings." "Also true. She says—" Clara stopped. "She says that Whitmore Estate is the poorer for my absence in ways that have nothing to do with household management." Nathaniel said nothing. "She says she hopes I know that she has always considered me—" Clara's voice caught, just barely. She steadied it. "Family. That she has always considered me family, and was sorry she had not said so plainly and years ago, when it might have changed things." The garden was very quiet. A bird called somewhere in the elm tree above them. The summer heat pressed softly. Clara sat with the letter in her hands, and the 7 weeks and the 8 years, and all the careful, steady, exhausting, honest work of being a person who paid attention and asked for very little. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I am afraid that I will go back, and within 3 months everything will be exactly as it was, that the dailiness of it will wear away the—" She gestured slightly, at the air between them. "All of this. the letters, the effort, that it will be easier to simply fall back into the old shape. That is possible, he said. I won't tell you it isn't, because you'd know I was lying, and then we'd have a different problem. What would you do to prevent it? He looked at her steadily. I would start by making sure that you have dinner with the family, every evening. Not in the kitchen, not in the sitting room, not wherever the household staff eats. At the table. He paused. I would make sure that when I have guests who ask who you are, I introduce you by your name, and not your function. Another pause. And I would ask you, regularly and without resentment, what you think. About the land, the accounts, the household, my decisions, whatever you have an opinion about, and I would listen. Clara looked at him. I would also, he said, like to talk to you, properly, the way we have been writing, about things that are not tasks. A beat. I find I have become quite accustomed to knowing what you think, about Locke, about Pruitt, about the kind of love that is honest versus the kind that simply performs itself. I don't particularly want to stop. She looked at her hands. At the letter from Mrs. Whitmore. At the man sitting beside her in Ruth Alcott's garden with 40 miles of road behind him and his hat still in his hands. She thought about the chair by the window. She thought about what it would mean to go back. She thought about what it would mean not to. I will come, she said, but I have conditions. Something in him eased, very slightly. And then he straightened, because he understood that the conditions were the point. Tell me, he said. I will not manage the household, she said. I will help, if I choose to, with specific things that interest me, but I am not returning as a household manager. Agreed, he said without hesitation. I will have my own room, my own schedule, my own correspondence. She looked at him. My own life, inside that house. Yes, he said. If at any point I find that I am making myself small again, I will say so, and I will expect to be heard. I expect you will say so, he said. You've been practicing. She looked at him. I meant it as a compliment, he said. I know, she said. I'm not certain it was a wise thing to say, but I know you meant it as a compliment. She paused. One more condition. All right. She looked at him directly. If this, whatever this is, whatever it becomes, if it becomes something that can't be contained in the category of household guest and employer's correspondence, I need you to be honest about it. Publicly honest, not privately considerate. She held his gaze. I spent 8 years in the background. I will not go back to the background. He held her gaze without flinching. Clara, he said, I drove 40 miles before sunrise so I could sit in a garden and ask you to come back. I think we are considerably past the background. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up. I'll speak to Ruth, she said. I'll need 2 days to make arrangements. He stood as well. I can wait. You drove 40 miles before sunrise, she said. You should probably eat something first. He almost smiled. Is that? Ruth made biscuits, Clara said. She makes them well. You'll have to tell her so yourself. She doesn't accept compliments through intermediaries. She walked toward the house. He stood in the garden for a moment, in the elm shade, holding. Then he followed her. She came back on a Tuesday, not the way she had left, not in the quiet dark with a folded letter and a single bag and the particular silence of someone who has decided and will not be reconsidered. She came back in the full morning, with Ruth's boy driving the cart, with 2 bags instead of 1, with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, and the absolute composed attention of a woman who has decided something and means to stand by it. Nathaniel was in the yard when the cart came up the drive. He had not planned to be in the yard. He had planned to be in the library, working, as though this were an ordinary Tuesday, and he was a man for whom ordinary Tuesdays were not complicated. He had told himself that meeting her at the door would be too much, too eager, too weighted, too reminiscent of the dozen things he was trying not to repeat. He had lasted approximately 40 minutes in the library before he gave up and went outside. Howe was standing near the fence when the cart came through the gate. He stayed where he was. She saw him. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she stepped down from the cart without waiting for assistance, which was so entirely characteristic of her that something in his chest loosened. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Miss Bennet," he said. Then, "Clara." She looked at him steadily. "Nathaniel," she said. That was all. But it was the first time in 8 years she had said his name directly to his face, and they both understood that. And neither of them made anything of it, which was precisely the right response. "My mother is in the morning room," he said. "She's been there since breakfast." "I'll go to her," Clara said. She looked at the bags. "I can manage those." "James will take them," he said. "Your room is ready." She paused. "Which room?" "Not the old one," he said. "The corner room on the second floor. It has better light." She looked at him for a moment. "My mother's idea," he said. "Of course it was," she said, and walked past him toward the house, and he stood there and watched her go, and felt, in a way he could not have articulated and did not attempt to, that something which had been tilted for 7 weeks had quietly, carefully, returned to level. Mrs. Whitmore cried when she saw her. She did not cry easily. Margaret Whitmore had been raised in a tradition that considered public emotion a kind of imposition on others. But when Clara appeared in the doorway of the morning room, she made a sound that was not quite a word and stood up faster than she usually stood. And Clara crossed the room, and the older woman took her hands and held them for a long moment. "You're thin," Mrs. Whitmore said. "I'm exactly the same," Clara said. "You're thin and you look tired, and I should have written to you months ago." She squeezed her hands. "I should have written to you years ago. I should have said a great many things I didn't say." "Mrs. Whitmore." "Sit down," the older woman said. "I've been practicing what I want to tell you since August, and I'm not going to let you interrupt me out of politeness." Clara sat. Mrs. Whitmore sat across from her and looked at her with the direct, serious attention of someone who has worked out exactly what they mean to say and intends to say it. "I knew," she said. "I want you to understand that I knew what you felt. I have known for some years. I am not a foolish woman, and you are not a subtle woman. Not about that, whatever you may think." Clara was very still. "I said nothing," Mrs. Whitmore continued, "because I did not know how to intervene without doing damage. My son he was not ready to see clearly. And I told myself that time would correct it, that he would eventually pay attention." She paused. "I waited too long. That is my failure, and I own it." She met Clara's eyes. "I am not asking you to forgive me for it. I am asking you to let me be, from this point forward, the person I should have been from the beginning." Clara's throat tightened in a way she had been hoping to avoid. "You are not an employee in this house," Mrs. Whitmore said. "You have never been merely an employee in this house. You have been, in the truest sense I know, the person who kept this family together when I did not have the strength to do it, and my son did not have the awareness. And I will not allow that to go unnamed again." She folded her hands. "Is that understood?" Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "It is." "Good." Mrs. Whitmore released a breath. "Now, tell me about Ruth Alcott. Is she well? I've always liked Ruth." The first week was careful. That was the only word for it. Both of them, Clara and Nathaniel, moved around each other with the deliberate, considerate attention of people who are aware that old habits have grooves, and that the easiest thing in the world would be to slide back into them without noticing. He noticed. He noticed when he handed her a letter from a neighbor and said, "Would you mind drafting a reply?" And she looked at him with a calm, level expression that said everything, and he said, "I apologize, I'll draft it myself." And she had said, "I don't mind offering my thoughts on the content, if that's useful." And he had said, "It is, very." And they had sat across from each other at the library table and talked through the reply together, which was different, fundamentally, in every small way, from him dictating and her transcribing. She noticed when she started, on the third morning, to reorganize the kitchen schedule, which had fallen into disarray in her absence, and stopped herself, hands on the papers, and put them back. It was not her kitchen schedule. It was not her responsibility. She had made a condition, and she intended to keep it. She told the cook, Mary, that she'd noticed the schedule was uneven. "If you'd like help sorting it," she said, "I'm glad to. But only if you'd like the help." Mary stared at her. Mary had been cook at Whitmore Estate for 11 years and was not accustomed to being asked. "Yes, ma'am," she said, in a tone that suggested she wasn't sure what had just happened. "I'd appreciate that." "Good," Clara said. "We'll do it together then." It was a small thing, but small things, she had learned, were the actual texture of change. The first real test came on a Thursday, at dinner. Nathaniel had invited 2 neighbors, the Calloway brothers, who managed adjacent tobacco land and whose company he had tolerated for years, with the practiced ease of a man who understands that neighbors are a long-term investment, regardless of personal compatibility. They arrived with the comfortable assumption of men who know the shape of the evening they are about to have. They did not know Clara was at Whitmore Estate. George Calloway saw her at the dinner table and did the thing that men of his type and era did without thinking about it. He looked past her, toward Nathaniel, with the faint crease of uncertainty that precedes the question of whether to acknowledge someone whose category is unclear. "Gentlemen," Nathaniel said, before that crease could form into anything, "you know my mother, and this is Miss Clara Bennett, who is a guest of our family." Something in George Calloway's expression shifted, reassessing, recalibrating. "Miss Bennett," he said, with the adjusted courtesy of a man who has recognized he was about to make an error. "A pleasure." "Mr. Calloway," Clara said, with the perfect, composed warmth she had developed over years of managing dinner tables. "I've heard a good deal about the creek boundary situation. I understand it's been a source of some frustration." George Calloway blinked. "Well, yes, it has, actually. You're aware of the drainage issue has complicated the Eastern Survey," she said. "I believe there was a similar problem with the Henderson property 2 seasons ago. The resolution there might be worth examining." George Calloway looked at her with the expression of a man who has unexpectedly been met where he stands. "I'd be interested to hear about that," he said. Nathaniel, at the head of the table, said nothing. But Clara, who was watching his face without appearing to watch his face, saw something she recognized, the expression of a man who is seeing something clearly that he has seen before without registering it, and is feeling, quietly and without theatrics, the weight of the years he didn't register it. After the Calloways left, he found her in the library, reading. "George Calloway has been trying to resolve that drainage matter for 3 years, he said. "I know," she said. "I found the Henderson correspondence when I was organizing the files in 1814. "You remembered it?" "I remember most things," she said. She looked up at him. "You knew that." "I knew you were efficient," he said. "That's different from knowing what I actually knew." She looked at him for a moment. "That is a surprisingly precise distinction. I've had time to think," he said. "And I've had a good deal of your letters to learn from." She returned to her book. He remained in the doorway. "You didn't correct George when he tried to look past you," he said. "You just spoke, like it was already understood that you belonged at the table." "It was already understood," she said, without looking up. "By me." He was quiet. "That's new," he said softly. "Yes," she said. "It is." He nodded once and left her to her book. And Clara sat in the library that had been the center of her working life for 8 years, reading in the chair that had always been available to her, and which she had almost never used because there had always been something else to do, and she felt the particular satisfaction of a woman who has claimed something that was always hers and simply never picked up. The second week brought a letter that changed everything. It arrived on a Monday, addressed to Nathaniel, from a man named Silas Crane. The name was not immediately familiar to Clara, but the letter was left on the hall table in the ordinary way, and she happened to be passing when it caught her eye. Not because she was reading his correspondence, but because the return address was Richmond, and the handwriting was the same as a letter she had seen and filed and noted with a small private concern in the spring of 1815. She did not open it. She left it on the table and went about her morning. But she thought about it all through breakfast, and through the conversation with Mrs. Whitmore about the East Garden, and through the mid-morning hour she spent in the library reading. until finally she set her book down and acknowledged, with the directness she was practicing, that she was thinking about it because it mattered, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. She found Nathaniel in the yard. "There's a letter from Silas Crane," she said. He looked up from the fence he was examining. "I saw it." "Have you read it?" "Not yet. Do you know the name?" She hesitated. The old hesitation, the careful management of how much to offer. She caught herself. "Yes," she said. "I filed a letter from Crane in the spring of 1815. It was addressed to Pruitt." Nathaniel went still. "Not directly suspicious," she said. "But I noted it because the timing coincided with one of the larger discrepancies in the accounts, and because Crane's name appeared in the correspondence of 2 other land agents in the county whose practices had been questioned." She paused. "I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't have enough to bring to you that was conclusive, and because—" She stopped. "Because you weren't sure I'd listen," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Because I wasn't sure the information would be welcome." He held her gaze for a moment. "Come inside," he said. "Let's read it together." The letter was not long. Crane was a lawyer of the middling sort, capable enough, connected enough to be useful, not distinguished enough to be careful. He was writing to inform Nathaniel that a claim had been filed against the Whitmore estate's eastern parcel, alleging that a section of the creek boundary had been improperly surveyed 3 years prior, and that the land in question properly belonged to a neighboring holding whose deed Crane represented. Nathaniel read it twice. Then he set it down. "This is connected to Pruitt," he said. It was not a question. "Almost certainly," Clara said. "If Pruitt was inflating costs and misreporting land work, a boundary dispute would be a way to monetize the confusion. Someone buys the claim, forces a resurvey, and in the process of disputing the original survey, the irregularities in Pruitt's records either disappear or become attributed to legitimate error." Nathaniel looked at her. "How do you know this?" "My father had a parishioner who lost 40 acres to exactly this mechanism," she said. "I was 17. I watched it happen. I've never forgotten what the paperwork looked like at the beginning." He sat back in his chair. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. "If you had not come back," he said slowly, "and if I had simply received this letter and dealt with it through ordinary channels, you would likely have engaged a lawyer without knowing the connection to Pruitt," she said. "The cases would have been handled separately. The full picture would have been obscured." He was quiet for a long moment. "I need your help," he said. It was 3 words, simple, direct, entirely without the comfortable assumption that help would be provided because it was her function to provide it. She felt the difference. "I know," she said. "Let's start with the 1815 correspondence."
Ciao.
They spent 4 days on it. Not Clara alone in the library, while Nathaniel attended to other things. Together. At the same table, with the same documents between them, talking through each piece of evidence with the combined understanding of 2 people who had, between them, either observed or managed every significant transaction at Whitmore Estate for the better part of a decade. It was unlike anything they had done before, and both of them knew it, and neither of them commented on it directly, because to comment on it would be to interrupt it, and neither of them wanted to interrupt it. On the second day, Mrs. Whitmore appeared in the library doorway, looked at the 2 of them sitting across from each other with papers spread between them and the easy shorthand of people who have been talking for hours, and went away again without saying a single word. Clara heard her in the hall, heard the soft, satisfied sound she made, which was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, but was unmistakably the sound of a woman who has been waiting a long time for something and has just seen it arrive. On the 3rd day, Nathaniel said, "You mentioned your father once, in one of the letters, that he listened to people with his whole attention." She looked up from the document she was reading. "I did. I've been thinking about that." He turned a page without reading it. "About what it means, to actually listen. Not to wait for the relevant information and then respond to it, but to listen." She waited. "I didn't do it," he said. "For 8 years. I was present and I was occupied, and I was, by any external measure, attending. But I wasn't listening." He looked at her. "I don't know when I stopped. or whether I ever truly started. You're doing it now, she said. I know. He paused. I don't want credit for it. I'm not offering credit, she said. I'm offering information. There's a difference. His mouth curved just slightly. Now who's making precise distinctions? She returned to the document. But she was aware, in the way she was always aware of things without appearing to be, that he was watching her with the particular attention of a man who has recently learned the value of watching and is making up for lost time. On the fourth day, they found it, a letter, tucked inside the back cover of the blue folder. Inside the cover itself, not filed with the documents, which was why neither of them had found it before. Clara had sewn the folder's lining herself, 2 years ago, when the binding had begun to separate. She had tucked this letter there at the time, because she had not known what to do with it, and had not been ready to discard it, and had needed it to be somewhere she would find it again when she was ready. She recognized it when Nathaniel opened the back cover and the lining separated slightly under his hands. There's something in here, he said. I know, she said. I put it there. He looked at her. 2 years ago, she said. I intercepted it. It was addressed to Pruitt, left by error in the household correspondence. I read it because I read all the correspondence. She paused. I should have brought it to you immediately. I didn't because at that point I wasn't certain you would. She stopped. Because I wasn't certain how to explain how I had come to read Pruitt's personal mail, and because the letter was not, on its own, enough. He extracted it carefully. He read it. Then he put it on this table between them. It was from Silas Crane, dated January 1814. It was brief, businesslike, and entirely unambiguous about the arrangement between Crane, Pruitt, and a third party, a Richmond land speculator named Aldous Vetch, to systematically overstate improvement costs on 5 properties in the county, redirect the surplus through Crane's office, and prepare false survey documents that would be filed if and when the scheme required legal protection. Whitmore Estate was listed by name, as were 2 other prominent families. Nathaniel sat very still. Vetch, he said. I know that name. He's been buying discounted claims on contested land parcels for 3 years, Clara said. I noted his name in the Richmond Land Registry correspondence in early 1815. I didn't know then that he was connected to Pruitt directly. But you suspected something. I suspected enough to keep the letter, she said. I didn't suspect enough to know what it meant. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her. How much of what you have been doing for 8 years, Clara, was official household management? And how much of it was this? She held his gaze. Both, she said honestly. I couldn't separate them. When you manage a household carefully, you see the whole picture. And when you see the whole picture, you can't pretend not to have seen it. She paused. I did try, a few times. Pretending not to see things is exhausting, and I was never very good at it. He looked at the letter. He looked at the folder. He looked at the 8 years of careful, precise, quietly extraordinary work that she had done in this house. And he felt, not for the first time, but more completely than before, the full weight of what he had not seen. This letter, he said, could be the difference between a lawsuit we win and a lawsuit we lose, between a manageable legal complication and the loss of a significant portion of the estate. Yes, she said, and you kept it for 2 years, without telling anyone, because you weren't sure it would be useful in the right hands. Because I wasn't sure, she said quietly, that the right hands were available. He looked at her. She met his eyes. She did not look away. I'm sorry, he said. And he said it not the way he had said it in letters, carefully, with the awareness of an audience, but the way a man says it when there's no one else in the room and no version to perform. Just the plain, inadequate, entirely genuine truth of it. I know, she said. That's not enough. I know that too, she said. But it's what there is. And it's real. And I prefer real. She looked at the letter on the table. We should send for a lawyer, not Crane, obviously. He almost laughed. It was not a comfortable laugh, but it was real. I know a man in Richmond, he said. Thomas Hadley's brother. He's honest. Good, she said. Write to him today. Yes, ma'am, he said. She looked at him sharply. That was... I apologize. I didn't mean... You said it, she said. Like a habit. It is a habit, he said. A 34-year habit of treating you as the person who knows what to do next. He paused. Though to be fair, you do know what to do next. That does not make it appropriate. No, he said. It doesn't. He picked up his pen. He looked at her. What if I said it differently? What if I said, you're right, and I will? She considered. That is considerably better. I thought so. He began to write. The lawyer's name was Edmund Hadley, and he came from Richmond the following week and sat in the Whitmore Library with the letter and the folder and the ledger, and spent 3 hours working through it all with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who understands that thoroughness now prevents catastrophe later. He looked up at one point and said to Nathaniel, Whoever compiled this documentation did exceptional work. The cross-references alone would have taken a professional investigator months. Nathaniel looked at Clara, who was sitting across the table and had said almost nothing for the past hour, as she had been doing for 8 years. Miss Bennet identified the irregularities, he said. The documentation is hers. Edmund Hadley looked at Clara. He looked at her with the open, direct assessment of a man revising his assumptions in real time. Miss Bennet, he said, do you have a legal background? No, she said. I have a thorough background in paying attention. That is, in my experience, more useful, Hadley said. He looked back at the documents. The claim against the Eastern parcel will not survive a serious examination given this evidence. The more important question is whether to pursue Crane and Vetch actively, which I would recommend. He looked at Nathaniel. With your permission, I'd like to coordinate with the other families named in this letter as well. This is larger than one estate. Do what you need to do, Nathaniel said. Good. Hadley gathered the documents with careful hands. He looked at Clara again. Miss Bennet, if you are willing, I would find your knowledge of the original correspondence invaluable during the proceedings. The person who compiled this documentation will be the most effective witness to its contents. Clara was quiet for a moment. She looked at Nathaniel. He said very simply, It's your choice. Not, of course she'll help. Not, I'm sure she'd be glad to. Not the comfortable 8-year assumption that her time and her capabilities were available for deployment at his convenience. Her choice. She turned back to Hadley. I'm willing, she said. I'll need to review my notes before we proceed. Of course, he said. He left 2 hours later with a significant portion of the estate's most important documents and the promise to be in contact within the fortnight. Nathaniel walked him to the door. When he came back, Clara was still at the table, writing in the margin of her own copy of the ledger. Cross-references, notes, the particular kind of preparation that looks like thoroughness and is, in fact, a form of care. He sat across from her. She did not look up. I'm going to need access to the household files from 1813, she said. The originals, not the copies. They're in the cabinet by the window, he said. I know where they are. She looked up. I put them there. A beat. Right, he said. Nathaniel. She set down her pen. She looked at him directly. This is going to be complicated. Hadley is right that it is larger than one estate. The other families named in that letter. Do you know them? The Morrows and the Bishops, he said. We are on reasonable terms. They need to know, she said. Not just about the legal action, about Pruitt and Crane and the full scope of it. Because if this is handled only through the courts, Vetch may have enough connection to delay it indefinitely. But if 3 prominent families in the county present a unified account, the social pressure becomes as significant as the legal one, he said. It has historically been more effective, she said. And faster. He looked at her. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about it for 2 years, she said. I didn't have the position to act on it. Now I do. The room was quiet for a moment. What position is that? He asked carefully. She met his eyes. Guest of the family, she said. which is considerably more than I had before. He held her gaze. It is, he said. Though I'd argue it understates the situation. Then argue it, she said. I'll listen. His expression did something complicated, something she recognized. Not the comfortable, habitual face of a man who is not paying attention, but the vulnerable, effortful face of one who is paying all of it and is very aware of the cost. You are the most capable person I know, he said. You are the sharpest, the most careful, the most genuinely intelligent person who has ever sat across from me at this desk. And I spent 8 years treating that as a feature of the furniture. He paused. What you are in this house is whatever you decide to be. That has always been true. I'm aware now that it was true even when I was acting as though it wasn't. She was quiet for a long moment. That, she said finally, is a very good argument. Good, he said. Then we're in agreement. We're in the early stages of agreement, she corrected. Which is different. Yes, he said. I've learned the difference. She almost smiled. She picked up her pen. Go right to the Morrows, she said. I'll draft something for you if you'd like. I'd like, he said. Though I'll write it myself and ask for your notes after. She looked up at him. Practicing, he said. This time, she did smile. It was small and brief, and she returned immediately to her work. But it was there, and he saw it, and he went to find paper and his pen, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, that he was in exactly the right room. The third week brought dinner with the Morrows. James and Harriet Morrow were 20 years Nathaniel's seniors, practical, respected, the kind of family that had built what they had through 2 generations of careful stewardship, and were accordingly resistant to anything that threatened it. James Morrow had the watchful eyes of a man who trusts numbers more than words. Harriet Morrow had the particular alertness of a woman who has spent 40 years compensating for the fact that numbers are not the only thing that matters. They came to dinner on a Thursday evening. Clara sat at the table, not as a guest who has been introduced and then politely reduced to background. Nathaniel had told them, in the letter, that he wished to discuss a legal matter of shared interest and that Miss Clara Bennett, who had been instrumental in uncovering the relevant evidence, would be present. James Morrow shook her hand when he arrived, with the brief, evaluating grip of a man assessing a business contact. Harriet Morrow looked at her with a warmth that was not quite personal and not quite social, and landed somewhere in the vicinity of genuine respect for someone whose capability has preceded them. You compiled the documentation on Pruitt, Harriet said, as they sat down. Yes, Clara said. How long had you suspected something was wrong? Since the autumn of 1813, Clara said, when the first discrepancy appeared. Harriet Morrow looked at her steadily. That's 3 years. Yes, Clara said. I'm aware. Why didn't... Harriet stopped herself. She looked at Nathaniel. She looked back at Clara. She did not say the rest of the sentence because she was a perceptive woman, and she understood, from the particular silence in the room, that the end of that sentence was something they had all already visited. The documentation needed to be conclusive before it could be actionable, Clara said. That took time. Harriet Morrow accepted this and did not pursue the other part, and Clara was grateful for it in the measured, practical way she was grateful for most things, quietly and without display. Over dinner, they worked through the details of the legal strategy. James Morrow was decisive once he had the information, the kind of man who deliberates slowly and then moves fast, which Clara recognized as the most reliable type of decision-maker in a crisis. He agreed to speak with the bishops. He agreed to coordinate with Hadley. He agreed that the public element of the exposure, the social and reputational dimension, was not optional if they wanted a result that held. There will be talk, he said, about Crane, about Vetch, about Pruitt. He looked at Nathaniel. About how long this was going on before anyone caught it. I know, Nathaniel said. People will wonder why your household... I'm aware of what people will wonder, Nathaniel said. He looked at Clara, then back at Morrow. The answer to their wondering is that the evidence was compiled by someone I was not, for some time, paying adequate attention to, and that I am remedying that now. Morrow looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Clara. Clara said nothing. She was watching Nathaniel with an expression that she could not entirely control and was not entirely trying to. He had said it. In front of James and Harriet Morrow, at his own dinner table, in the county where his family name meant something and where the social calculation was not trivial. He had said it plainly and without softening and without making it about anything except the truth. Harriet Morrow, across the table, met Clara's eyes, and very slightly, with the discretion of a woman who has seen a great deal in 40 years of marriage, she smiled. After the Morrows left, the house was quiet. Mrs. Whitmore had retired early. James had put out the hall lamps. The September night had turned cool in the way September nights in Virginia do. Suddenly, without announcement, the summer finally releasing its hold. Clara was in the library, going through the documents one more time before the morning. She heard him come in. She did not look up. "James Morrow thinks you're remarkable," Nathaniel said. "James Morrow thinks the documentation is thorough," she said. "He said, and I am quoting him as precisely as I can, that he has worked with 3 lawyers, 2 accountants, and a federal land surveyor in the past decade, and none of them produced work of this quality." He sat down. "He asked if you had trained formally." "He asked me directly," Clara said. "I told him no." "What did he say?" "He said that was a significant waste." She turned a page. "I agreed with him." Nathaniel was quiet. "I'm not looking for reassurance," she said, before he could speak. "I'm used to it, the waste of it. I'm used to being the most prepared person in the room and the last one anyone thought to consult directly." She set the page down. "What I'm not sure I'm used to yet is this." "This," he said. "This," she said. "Being consulted. Being introduced. Being—" She stopped. "You said something at dinner that you didn't need to say." "I said something true," he said. "You said something true that cost you something," she said. "In front of people whose opinion matters to your life here. And you said it anyway." He met her eyes. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said finally, "I am done conducting my life in a way that requires me to manage what people know about me. I did that for 8 years. It's exhausting, and it's dishonest, and it costs more than it saves." He paused. "And because you have been doing this work, and being this person, and caring about this family for 8 years, and the least, the absolute minimum, is that the people in this county know your name." Clara looked at him. She had spent 8 years in this house, learning to read the difference between what people said and what they meant. She had learned to track the gap between intention and execution, between the stated feeling and the actual one. She was very good at it. She looked at Nathaniel Whitmore sitting across from her in the lamplight at the library table with the September night pressing against the windows and the folder between them, and she read the gap, and there was none. "I am not going to manage what happens between us," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm done managing everything. Whatever this becomes, it becomes honestly, or it doesn't become at all." "I know," he said. "I will not go back to being invisible," she said. "Not for anyone. Not for you. Not even to make things easier." "I know," he said again. "I'm not asking you to." She looked at him for a long moment. "The roses by the east door need cutting," she said. He blinked. I'll do it tomorrow morning," she said. "Because I want to. Not because someone needs me to." She stood, collected her papers, and looked at him one more time. "Good night, Nathaniel." "Good night, Clara," he said. She went to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "You did well tonight," she said. "At dinner. You didn't have to say what you said." "I know," he said. "But you did," she said. "And it mattered." She left. He sat in the library alone for a long time, with the lamplight and the papers and the September cool coming under the door, and he thought about 8 years, and what they had cost, and what, if he was very careful and very honest, and paid the kind of attention he should have been paying all along, they might yet become. The chair across from him was empty, but this time it was not the emptiness of abandonment. It was simply the end of an evening, and there would be another morning. The hearing was set for the second Friday of October. Edmund Hadley had moved faster than anyone had expected. Within 3 weeks of receiving the Crane letter, he had filed the necessary documents with the county court, coordinated with the Morrows and the bishops, and built a case that Hadley himself described, with the careful understatement of a man who does not like to celebrate prematurely, as unusually solid. Clara knew it was more than unusually solid. She had helped build it. She had spent the better part of September at the library table, working through correspondence and cross-referencing dates, and writing the kind of clear, organized summaries that turned a pile of evidence into a story anyone could follow. Hadley visited twice more during that period, and both times he sat across from her with the focused attention of a man who has stopped being surprised and started being genuinely impressed, and both times he addressed his questions to her directly and waited for her answers with the patience of someone who understands that the answer is worth waiting for. Nathaniel sat with them. Every session, every review, every argument about which documents to lead with and which to hold in reserve. He sat there not because he was the one being asked questions, increasingly he wasn't, but because he was paying attention, and paying attention had become, in the past weeks, something he treated as both a discipline and a debt. On the Thursday evening before the hearing, Clara sat in the library until late. She wasn't working. The preparation was done. Everything that could be organized was organized. Everything that could be cross-referenced had been, and the stack of documents that Hadley would carry into the county courthouse the following morning was as complete and as clear as anything she had ever assembled. She sat in the library because she wasn't sure she could sleep, and because the library had always been where she went when the rest of the house felt too small for what she was carrying. She heard him before she saw him. His particular step in the corridor. She had known it for 8 years, had used it to track where he was in the house without appearing to track it. The way you learn the rhythms of a place you are responsible for. He appeared in the doorway. "You should sleep," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on it." He came in and sat across from her. Not at the desk, in the other chair, the one that had been there for years, and that she had so rarely used herself because there had always been work to do in the proper chair. He sat in it the way a man sits when he is not there to accomplish anything. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" he asked. "No," she said. "The case is sound. Hadley is capable. The documentation is clear." She paused. "I'm worried about after tomorrow." He looked at her. "Tell me." She was quiet for a moment, arranging the words with the care she always gave to things that mattered. "After tomorrow," she said, "the legal matter will be resolved, one way or another. Crane and Vetch will face consequences or they won't, but the outcome will be determined. And then?" She stopped. "And then we go on. And I need to know what going on looks like." He held her gaze. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking," she said, "what I am in this house. Not as a legal matter, not as a social introduction, what I actually am." The fire had burned low. The room was quiet in the particular way that rooms are quiet at 11 at night, when the rest of a house is asleep, and two people are saying the things they have been building toward for months. "You are," he said carefully, "the person I want to have dinner with every evening. The person I want to talk to when something goes wrong and when something goes right. The person whose opinion I trust more than anyone else's on this earth." He paused. "You are the person I have been trying, badly and too late, and with insufficient preparation, to ask to stay." "I am staying," she said. "I told you I would." "Not as a guest," he said. She looked at him. "Not as a family guest, or a household asset, or any category that allows either of us to pretend that what this is something convenient and manageable." He leaned forward. "I am asking you, Clara, plainly, without the letter as a buffer between us, to stay because you want to be here. Because I want you here. Because there is not a version of the future I can construct where this house means anything without you in it. And I am done pretending that's a professional assessment." The room held very still. "That," Clara said quietly, "is not the kind of thing you can take back." "I know," he said. "I don't want to take it back. It will change everything." "It already has," he said. Everything changed 7 weeks ago when I walked into an empty sitting room and found a folded letter on the desk. I've been catching up to that change ever since." He held her gaze. "The question is whether you'll let me." She sat with that for a long moment. Outside, the October night was cold and still, and somewhere on the grounds a horse moved in the paddock, the same sound she had fallen asleep to for 8 years. And the fire was almost out, and the library was just a room where two people were finally telling each other the truth. "Ask me properly," she said. He looked at her. Then, with the particular gravity of a man who understands that this moment does not have a rehearsal and cannot be managed into safety, he said, "Will you stay, Clara? Not for the house, not for my mother, or the accounts, or the roses by the east door. For me. Because I see you. Because I have learned to see you, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are never invisible again." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "Not I suppose. Not I'll consider it." Not the careful, qualified, measured responses she had trained herself to give to a world that had taught her that wanting too openly was a form of recklessness. Just yes. He let out a breath that sounded like a man setting down something heavy that he has been carrying for a very long time. "Good," he said. "Don't say good," she said. "Why not?" "Because it sounds like you've resolved an accounting problem." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, with the quality of something loosening, "You are the most exacting woman I have ever met." "Yes," she said. "You should have paid attention sooner." And there it was. The first time she had said it directly. Not in a letter, not in a careful, cushioned observation. Directly, plainly, with the small and entirely genuine warmth that had been underneath everything she'd ever done in this house, and which he had spent 8 years attributing to professionalism. "I should have," he said. "I know it. I reckon I'll be knowing it for some time." "Good," she said. "Then we're even." He laughed. A real one, quiet and surprised, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She stood up. "Get some sleep," she said. "The hearing is at 9. He stood as well. "Clara." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "For staying. For coming back. For all of it." She held his gaze. "Don't thank me," she said. "See me. That's all I ever wanted." "I know," he said. "I do." She went upstairs. He stood in the library alone for a moment, and then he looked at the chair by the window. The one that had been hers, that had been empty for 7 weeks, that was hers again now in a way that had nothing to do with function and everything to do with the simple, solid truth of where she belonged. And he felt, completely and without reservation, that he was a man who had nearly lost the most important thing in his world through the particular negligence of not paying attention, and who had been given, through no particular merit of his own, the chance to do otherwise. He put out the lamp. He went to bed. He slept. The hearing did not go smoothly. Clara had not expected it to. Crane was represented by a lawyer from Richmond, a polished, deliberate man named Waverley, who had the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to making complicated things seem simple and inconvenient truths seem debatable. The county courtroom was not large. It was a plain, wood-floored room with benches along the walls and a dais at the front where Judge Aldous Marsh, 70 years old, famously impatient, famously difficult to impress, presided with the unreadable attention of a man who has heard every version of every argument and is waiting to be surprised. The Morrows and the Bishops were there. Harriet Morrow sat directly behind Clara with the focused stillness of a woman who has come prepared to witness and will not be moved. James Morrow had brought his own set of documents. The Bishops had brought their lawyer, a quiet woman named Mrs. Crane, no relation, who had the distinction of being one of the very few women practicing law in Virginia in 1816, and who examined Waverley across the room with the expression of someone who has been underestimated so many times that she has made it a professional asset. Clara sat beside Hadley at the claimant's table. She had chosen, deliberately and without apology, to sit at that table rather than in the gallery. She was a witness. She was the architect of the documentation. She was the person whose 8 years of attention had made this moment possible, and she was not going to sit in the gallery and watch it happen at a distance. Nathaniel had not argued the point. He had simply sat down beside her. Waverly opened for Crane with the argument Clara had expected, that the letter was inadmissible, having been obtained through improper interception of private correspondence. He was smooth, he was prepared, and he was wrong, and he knew it. And the slight elevation of his chin as he made the argument told Clara that he was hoping the procedural challenge would be enough to rattle Hadley before the substantive case began. Hadley did not rattle. He addressed the admissibility question with the measured precision of a man who has already argued this point 3 times in his own office in preparation, and found 3 separate answers to it, all of which supported the same conclusion. The letter had been addressed to Pruitt, but delivered in error with the Whitmore household correspondence. It had been read in the ordinary course of household management by a person with legitimate authority over that correspondence. Its retention had been a matter of record-keeping, not surveillance. Judge Marsh listened. He looked at the letter. He looked at Waverly. "Motion denied," he said, with the economy of a man for whom excess words are an offense. "Continue." Waverly's chin came down slightly. And then the hearing began in earnest. Clara was called to testify at 11 o'clock. She had testified before in smaller matters, property disputes, neighborhood grievances, the kind of county business that occasionally required the account of someone who had been present and paying attention. She knew how it felt to stand at the front of a room and speak to a question that had consequences. This was different. This was Crane's lawyer standing 12 feet away with the full intention of dismantling everything she had built. "Miss Bennett," Waverly said, "you were employed at Whitmore Estate for 8 years as a household manager." "Yes," she said. "And in that capacity, you had access to correspondence belonging to other parties." "I had access to correspondence addressed to Whitmore Estate," she said, "and to correspondence delivered in error with the Whitmore household mail, which you read, which was part of my function," she said. "All correspondence through the household passed through my management. That was understood by everyone at the estate. But you did not immediately report this letter." "No," she said. "Why not?" She looked at him steadily. "Because a single letter, without corroborating documentation, would not have been sufficient to support the claim I suspected it supported. I continued to gather documentation for 18 months before the full picture was clear." "Or," Waverly said, with the particular precision of a lawyer constructing an alternative, "you held the letter until a moment when it would be most damaging to my client. A moment you controlled." The room was quiet. Clara looked at him. "If I had intended to use that letter for strategic damage," she said, "I would have done so 2 years ago when I still had the position to act on it directly. I did not, because at that time the documentation was not yet complete, and I was not willing to make a claim I could not substantiate." She paused. "What I was willing to do was wait, and document, and be certain. I understand that the thoroughness of that process is inconvenient for your argument, Mr. Waverly, but it is the truth." Something shifted in the courtroom. She felt it. The particular shift of a room deciding what it thinks about a person. Waverly tried 3 more approaches. She answered all of them with the same quality. Not combatively, not defensively, but with the level, precise honesty of a woman who knows exactly what she knows and is not going to be moved from it. On the 3rd approach, Judge Marsh looked up from his papers and said, in the dry, unhurried tone that was his signature, "Mr. Waverly, I have heard your challenge to this witness's credibility in 3 forms now. Unless you have a 4th form that is substantively different from the first 3, I suggest we proceed." Waverly sat down. Clara returned to her seat. Nathaniel did not say anything. He put his hand briefly over hers on the table. 1 moment, deliberate, visible to anyone in the room who was watching, and then withdrew it. She felt it in her chest like a struck bell. In the gallery, Harriet Morrow saw it. She looked at James. He looked at her. Neither of them said a word. Crane broke at 1:30. It was not dramatic. It was not the moment that stories tend to make of legal collapses. No sudden confession. No theatrical revelation. It was simply the moment when Waverly asked for a recess, spoke to Crane in the corner of the room for 11 minutes, and returned to tell Judge Marsh that his client was prepared to discuss terms. Marsh looked at him for a moment. "Terms," he said. "A negotiated resolution," Waverly said. "In lieu of—" "I am aware of what terms means, Mr. Waverly," Marsh said. "Give me one reason why I should accommodate that request, rather than simply proceeding to judgment." Waverly said something about the interests of expediency. Hadley said something about the interests of the three families who had been defrauded. Mrs. Crane, from her table, said something brief and extraordinarily precise about the interests of the county land registry, which had apparently been compromised by the false survey documents, and which gave the matter a public dimension that had not previously been fully articulated. Marsh listened to all of it. Then he said, "We will take a 1-hour recess. Mr. Hadley, you will meet with Mr. Waverly. Miss Bennett will be present as a consultant on behalf of the documented record, as she is the person most familiar with its contents. The parties will return at 2:30 with a proposal, or we proceed to judgment." Waverly looked at Miss Bennett being included in the negotiation. He looked like a man who was revising his assessment of the morning he'd had. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. Clara stood up, collected her papers, and walked into the side room with Hadley and Waverly without looking at anyone in the gallery. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel say quietly to James Morrow, "She built every piece of that case." And James Morrow say, equally quietly, "I know. You're a lucky man, Whitmore." And Nathaniel say, "I know it." The negotiated resolution took 40 minutes and was considerably more favorable to the three families than Crane had anticipated when he asked for the recess. Clara knew this because she had done the accounting, quietly and in the margin of her own notes, before the recess began. She knew exactly what the documentation supported, and exactly where the leverage was, and exactly how much Crane was willing to concede before the alternative became more expensive than the concession. She communicated this to Hadley in 3 short sentences before they sat down, and Hadley listened to all 3 with the focused attention of a man who has learned not to waste the information offered to him by someone who knows more than he does. The resolution included full repayment to all 3 estates of the documented overcharges, the surrender of Crane's legal license pending a formal review board, and a public filing in the county land registry correcting the false survey documents. Vetch, who was not present but whose connection had been thoroughly documented, faced a separate proceeding that Hadley indicated he would pursue with equal thoroughness. When they returned to the courtroom and the terms were read into the record, Judge Marsh looked over his papers at the room with the expression of a man who has seen a satisfying morning's work and intends to acknowledge it in exactly the amount of words it deserves. "The documentation in this case," he said, "is exemplary. It reflects a standard of precision and organization that is, in my experience, uncommon. The court notes its quality for the record." He looked at Clara directly. "Miss Bennett." She met his eyes. "Well done," he said. That was all. 2 words, from a man who had never in 40 years of practice been known for surplus. And the courtroom, which had been quiet, went briefly and entirely still. Then it released, and people stood, and Harriet Morrow crossed the room and took Clara's hands and said, "That was extraordinary." And Clara said, "The documentation was thorough." And Harriet said, "Don't do that. Accept it." Clara looked at her. "Accept it," Harriet said again, more gently. "You did something remarkable. Let someone say so." Clara took a breath. "Thank you," she said. "Better," Harriet said. Outside the courthouse, the October afternoon had turned bright and cold, the kind of Virginia autumn afternoon that arrives like a correction after a long summer, clear-headed, direct, without apology. Nathaniel found her at the edge of the steps, looking out at the road. "James wants to have us all to dinner," he said. "That's kind of him," she said. He said, and I am reporting this accurately, that any woman who can back Waverly into a corner in 40 minutes in a recess negotiation is welcome at his table any time she pleases. Clara almost smiled. "He also said," Nathaniel continued, "that his wife has been trying to convince him to hire a proper estate manager for 11 years, and he has finally found his standard." "I'm not looking for a position," Clara said. "I know," he said. I told him that. She looked at him. What exactly did you tell him? I told him, Nathaniel said, with the directness of a man who has been practicing, that Miss Bennet's situation at Whitmore Estate was not one of employment, and that if he was interested in hiring someone of her capability, he was welcome to look, but that he would not find her available. Clara looked at him for a long moment. That was presumptuous, she said. Yes, he agreed. Do you want me to go back in and correct it? She considered. No, she said. But you could have asked me first. You're right, he said. I could have. Old habits. You have a great many old habits. I am aware, he said. I'm working on them. Some of them are more stubborn than others. Yes, she said. I've noticed. He came to stand beside her. The road below them was busy with the ordinary afternoon traffic of a county seat. Carts, horses, the distant sound of the market closing down for the day. The world going on with its business, which was what the world did, regardless of what had just happened in the courthouse behind them. My mother is going to want to celebrate, he said. Your mother will be insufferable about this for a month, Clara said. And she will be right to be. She'll want to do something, a dinner, an occasion. Let her, Clara said. She's earned it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Clara. She looked at him. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want to ask it here, where neither of us is in the library with a task between us, and there is no correspondence to review and no meeting to prepare for. Just here. She turned to face him. I was looking at her with the expression she had learned to read over the past weeks. Not the habitual, comfortable face of a man who is not paying attention, but the open, slightly effortful face of one who is paying all of it, all the time, and finding it the most important work he has ever done. I know you said yes last night, he said. I know what that means, and I'm not asking you to repeat it, but I want to tell you something that I didn't say last night because I hadn't yet found the right words. She waited. I don't want you to stay because it makes sense, he said. I don't want you to stay because you're good at what you do, or because this house runs better with you in it, or because my mother loves you, or because the practical considerations all point in the same direction. He held her gaze. I want you to stay because I love you. Not the idea of you. Not the function of you. You. The woman who kept a letter for 2 years because she wasn't sure it would be welcome. The woman who taught a 13-year-old boy to read Locke in secret and never told anyone. The woman who wrote to me from 40 miles away and told me the truth about what I had done and what it had cost, and then came back anyway because she decided it was worth trying. He paused. I love you. I reckon I have for longer than I knew, and I was too much of a fool to see it. I'm asking you to let me spend a considerable amount of time making that right. The afternoon was very quiet around them. A cart went by on the road below. Somewhere a door opened and closed. The ordinary world, continuing. Clara looked at him. She had loved him, carefully and privately, and with full awareness of what she was loving, for years. She had put that love in a small box and kept it safe because it had seemed like the only sensible thing to do with something that could hurt you if it fell. She understood now that sensible and safe are not the same thing, and that the box she had built was not protecting the love. It was just making it smaller. You are, she said, still the most oblivious man I have ever known. He blinked. 8 years, she said. I was right there for 8 years. And it took a folded letter and 7 weeks of correspondence and a county courthouse for you to arrive at what was available the entire time. I know, he said. That is, she said, genuinely remarkable. I know that too. I am not going to pretend, she said, that it didn't cost something, because it did. Those 8 years cost something. I want you to know I know that, and that I'm not going to forget it, not because I want to punish you with it, but because it is true, and I have decided that the truth is the only ground I am willing to stand on with you. Yes, he said. That's fair. And, she said, I love you too. I have for a long time. I put it somewhere safe where it couldn't do any damage, and then I carried it across 40 miles and sat with it in Ruth Alcott's garden, and wrote it into letters and brought it back here, and it is still true, and I am done being careful with it." He looked at her. She looked back. "Good," he said. And then, remembering, "I know, that sounds like—" "It sounds like you," she said. "Leave it." He reached out and took her hand. Not briefly, not with the careful awareness of public gesture that had characterized every previous touch between them. He took it the way a man takes a hand when he intends to keep it. She let him. Around them, the October afternoon went on. The road, the carts, the market closing, the ordinary, irreducible fact of a county continuing its business. But inside that ordinary afternoon, something had settled that had been unsettled for 8 years. And the settling of it was not dramatic, and was not performed, and was exactly what it was. They did not announce anything that evening. Mrs. Whitmore knew. She had known since September, and she received the news of the hearing's outcome with enormous satisfaction, and the information that had been implicit since October began with the absolute, undemonstrative calm of a woman who has been waiting for the correct thing to happen for long enough that its arrival feels less like a surprise and more like a debt finally paid. She said nothing to either of them about it directly. She simply, at dinner that evening, moved Clara's place setting from the guest chair to the chair that had always been to Nathaniel's left, the chair that had been his mother's own, before she had taken to sitting at the other end, and sat down in her own chair at the foot of the table and picked up her fork. Clara looked at the chair. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore looked back at her with the small, precise, entirely satisfied expression of a woman who has made her position clear without using a single word. Clara sat down. Nathaniel sat down. Dinner proceeded. Over the following weeks, the changes were small and consistent, and, to anyone paying attention, entirely legible. At the morrow dinner, Clara sat beside Nathaniel and spoke when she had something to say, and did not defer, and was not expected to. When neighbors called, she was introduced by name and remained in the room. When business was discussed, her opinion was solicited directly and received with the attention it had always deserved. Samuel, who was 14 now, had graduated from Locke to Jefferson, and had been placed, through a quiet arrangement that Clara made with the schoolmaster in town, in a situation where his education could continue properly. He came to find her. The afternoon the arrangement was confirmed, and stood in the library doorway, with his hat in his hands. "Miss Bennet," he said, "Mr. Whitmore told me you arranged it." "Mr. Whitmore helped," she said. "Sit down, Samuel." He sat. He looked at his hat for a moment. "I know you left, a while back," he said. "I didn't know what to do about the books." "I heard you kept reading," she said. "I didn't know where else to put the feeling," he said. She looked at him. "That is," she said, "the best possible reason to read." He nodded. He looked at her with the direct, measuring gaze of a boy who is considerably older than his years in some ways, and is still working out the world in others. "Are you staying now?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He nodded again. "Good," he said, and put on his hat and went back to his work. On the last Sunday of October, Nathaniel asked her to walk with him. They walked the eastern field, which had been the subject of the disputed survey, and which was, now that the documentation had been corrected and the claim formally withdrawn, unambiguously Whitmore land. The morning was cold and clear, and the tobacco had been harvested, and the field was quiet in the way that fields are after a working season. Satisfied, used, ready. He had something in his coat pocket that she could see him aware of. She did not comment on it. She had learned, over 30 years of paying attention to people, that some things are better approached by simply walking alongside them. He stopped near the eastern fence line. He was quiet for a moment. Then he took the thing from his pocket. It was a ring, simple, plain, without extravagance. The kind of ring chosen by a man who understands that the woman he is giving it to has no patience for decoration as a substitute for meaning. She looked at it. She looked at him. "I am not asking you this," he said, "because it makes practical sense, or because it is the logical conclusion of a sequence of events, or because the county will understand the situation better if there is a clear category for it." He held it. I am asking you because I want to spend the rest of my life doing the work of seeing you clearly. And I want to do that work with the whole of whatever I am. Not the polished version. The whole thing. He paused. I reckon you've already seen the whole thing, so that's not much of an offer. But it's all I've got. Clara stood in the cold October morning with the eastern field behind her, and the man she had loved in a small, careful box for 8 years, standing in front of her, offering her everything in the plainest possible language. And she felt the box open, finally and completely, and the thing inside it be exactly as large as it had always actually been. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at him. You chose well, she said. I had help, he said. My mother. Of course she did, Clara said. He laughed. She laughed. The sound of it went out into the cold October morning and dissolved into the quiet of the field and the sky. And it was not a refined sound, and it was not a performed sound. It was just two people in the middle of a November morning being, for the first time, entirely themselves with each other. He took her hand. She let him keep it. They walked back toward the house together, toward the morning room where Mrs. Whitmore was waiting with the absolute patience of a woman who has already known what the answer would be for considerably longer than anyone else. And the cold air moved around them, and the field was still, and the house was there, solid and familiar, and entirely different from the house it had been in July, when it had held one empty chair and all the silence of something irreplaceable gone missing. The chair was not empty now. Neither was anything else. Clara Bennett had walked out of Whitmore Estate on a summer night with nothing but a folded letter and 8 years of careful, invisible, extraordinary work, and she had walked back into it as the woman she had always been. The woman who paid attention, who kept the question marks in the margins, who loved without permission and worked without acknowledgement and stayed without guarantee, until the day she decided she had done enough staying on other people's terms and began, for the first time, to stay on her own. And on that October morning, with the ring on her hand and the man beside her and the house ahead of them, she was not invisible, and she was not small, and she was not the woman in the background of someone else's story. She was the beginning, the middle, and the whole of her own. And she always had been.